The grand entrance of the hotel plaza loomed above me like the gates to a different world, one where debt collectors didn't pound on doors at 6 a.m, and the smell of stale yeast didn't cling to your hair like a second skin. I tightened my grip on the small beaded clutch I had borrowed from a vintage shop in the village, my knuckles turning white against the dark fabric. Tonight, I wasn't Clara Mitchell, the struggling owner of a bakery that was 3 days away from foreclosure. Tonight, I was a commodity, a carefully packaged product signed up for elite dates, trading a few hours of conversation for a check that would keep the ovens on for another month. I smoothed the fabric of my silver gown. Not green, never green, and certainly not the navy blue that every other woman seemed to wear to these functions. It was a sharp, metallic silver that made me feel like I was wearing armor. I needed armor. The email from the bank was burned into my retinas. Notice of default. Immediate action required. My father had died leaving me flour, sugar, and a mountain of hidden loans. I would sell my soul before I let them put a padlock on Mitchell's patisserie. Name? The doorman asked, his voice devoid of interest. Clara, I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my knees. I'm here for Lorenzo. Someone. The agency hadn't given me a last name, just a pseudonym and a description. The doorman checked a list, nodded once, and pulled open the heavy brass doors. The noise hit me first, a wave of laughter, clinking crystal, and a string quartet playing something aggressive and classical. The air smelled of expensive perfume and old money. I stepped inside, the heel of my shoe sinking slightly into the plush crimson carpet. I scanned the room, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The instructions were specific. Meet him by the central ice sculpture. He will be wearing a white boutonniere. I navigated through the crowd, feeling like an imposter. These people moved with a languid grace that screamed of generational wealth. I moved like I was late for a shift. I forced myself to slow down, to breathe. I spotted the sculpture, a ridiculous melting swan, and saw him. Lorenzo was undeniably handsome in a way that felt almost aggressive. He had jet black hair slicked back perfectly, skin that looked like it had never seen a day of hard labor, and a jawline that could cut glass. He was leaning against a pillar, checking his reflection in the screen of his phone. As I approached, he looked up. His eyes, dark and restless, swept over me. He didn't look at my face first. He looked at my body, a slow, assessing crawl that made my skin prickle with discomfort. You must be the bakery girl, he said. His voice was smooth, but there was a jagged edge to it, like a cracked veneer. Clara, I corrected, extending a hand. And you must be Lorenzo. He laughed, a short, sharp sound that didn't invite anyone else in. He took my hand, but his grip was clammy, his palm slightly moist. Lorenzo. Right. That's what they're calling me tonight. He didn't let go of my hand immediately. His thumb rubbed against my knuckles in a way that felt too familiar, too fast. You clean up nice for someone who plays with dough all day. The agency photos were conservative. This is better. I pulled my hand back, wiping it discreetly against my dress. Thank you. You have a lovely event here. It's a charity thing. Orphans or whales or something. I don't pay attention to the pamphlet. He winked, leaning in closer than necessary, invading my personal space with a cloud of heavy, musk-based cologne. I'm just here to make an appearance and spend some money. Speaking of which, you want a drink? You look stiff. Relax, sweetheart. I'm paying for your time, might as well enjoy it. A water would be fine, I said, trying to keep the grimace off my face. Water? Boring. I'll get us champagne. Stay here. Don't wander off. I want to parade you around in a bit. Make the old men jealous. He patted my arm, a condescending tap, and turned away, vanishing into the throng of people heading toward the bar. I let out a breath I had been holding for 5 minutes. 2 hours, I told myself. Just survive 2 hours of his arrogant commentary and clammy hands, get the check, and save the bakery. It was a transaction, nothing more. I leaned back against the pillar, closing my eyes for a second to center myself. The music shifted, the quartet stopped, and a full orchestra began to play a waltz. The atmosphere in the room changed, becoming heavier, more charged. May I? The voice came from behind me. It was deep, resonant, a baritone that vibrated through the floorboards and straight up my spine. I turned around, expecting to see Lorenzo back with the drinks. It was him, but it wasn't. The man standing before me had the same face, the same black hair, the same sharp jawline, the same height, but everything else was wrong. Or perhaps everything else was terrifyingly right. Where Lorenzo had slouched with arrogant laziness, this man stood with the stillness of a predator waiting in the tall grass. His tuxedo fit him differently, perfectly tailored across broad shoulders that seemed to strain against the fabric. He wasn't wearing a white boutonniere. He wasn't wearing anything unnecessary. But it was the eyes. Lorenzo's eyes had been restless, darting around the room, full of nervous energy. This man's eyes were dark, endless abysses of brown that locked onto mine with a focus so intense it felt like a physical touch. There was no moisture on his brow, no nervous tick in his jaw. He was absolute calm, absolute authority. I blinked, confused. Had he changed his jacket? Had he sobered up in the span of 3 minutes? "You're back fast," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "And you forgot the champagne." He didn't answer. He didn't smile. He didn't make a joke about whales or orphans. He simply extended a hand toward me. His palm was open, dry, and steady as a rock. "Dance," he commanded. It wasn't a question. It wasn't an invitation. It was an order delivered in a tone that suggested disobedience wasn't even a concept he recognized. I hesitated. My instincts, usually dormant, were suddenly screaming at me. This man felt dangerous in a way Lorenzo hadn't. Lorenzo was a sleazy rich boy. This man felt like he owned the building, the air, and potentially my next breath. But the contract? I was here to be a companion. If I caused a scene or refused him, I forfeited the money. I couldn't lose the bakery. I placed my hand in his. The moment our skin touched, a jolt of electricity shot up my arm, so violent I almost pulled back. His hand engulfed mine. It was hot, rough and calloused. The hand of a man who worked, who fought, not the soft, manicured hand I had touched earlier. His grip was firm, possessive, locking my fingers against his. He didn't wait for me to get my footing. He pulled me toward the dance floor. He didn't navigate the crowd. He parted it. People stepped out of his way instinctively, casting glances at him that looked a lot like fear. He didn't acknowledge anyone. His focus was entirely, suffocatingly, on me. When we reached the center of the floor, he spun me around. His arm snaked around my waist, pulling me flush against his body. I gasped. It was improper, far too close for a first dance, far too intimate for strangers. I could feel the hardness of his chest against my breasts, the solid muscle of his thigh brushing mine. He smelled different. The musk cologne was gone, replaced by the scent of rain, expensive scotch, and something sharp like gun oil. "Lorenzo?" I whispered, looking up at him. "You're different." He didn't speak. He began to move, and God, he could move. Lorenzo had walked with a swagger. This man danced with lethal precision. He guided me through the complex steps of the waltz, as if he were controlling my body with his mind. I didn't have to think. I just reacted to the subtle pressure of his fingers on my spine, the shift of his weight. We spun, the room blurring into streaks of gold and crimson around us. The silence between us stretched, thick and heavy. He was staring at me, studying every inch of my face. He looked at my mouth, then my eyes. Then the pulse I knew was fluttering wildly in my throat. It wasn't the lecherous look Lorenzo had given me. This was clinical, intense, like he was memorizing a map. "Why aren't you talking?" I asked, feeling breathless. "You couldn't stop talking about yourself 5 minutes ago." His eyes narrowed slightly, the first crack in his stoic mask. "Talking is for men who have nothing to say." His voice was deeper, rougher. It scraped against my nerves in the most delicious, terrifying way. "Who are you?" I whispered, the question slipping out before I could stop it. "You're not him. You can't be." He spun me out, the silver fabric of my dress flaring around my legs, and pulled me back in with a snap that brought our faces inches apart. "I am the man holding you," he said low. That is all you need to know. You're hurting me. I lied. He wasn't hurting me. He was holding me together. I felt safer in his arms than I had felt in years, and that terrified me more than the danger radiating off him. I would never hurt you, he said. The conviction in his voice stunned me. It sounded like a vow, but I will not let you go. We continued to dance. A dark island in the middle of the ballroom. I felt the eyes of the room on us, heavy with judgment and curiosity. But he created a force field that kept the world at bay. For the first time in my life, I wasn't worrying about the bills, the oven repairs, the lonely nights. I was just existing, burning in the heat of this stranger's gaze. Then, over his shoulder, I saw movement. I froze. My feet faltered, missing a step. The man holding me corrected my balance instantly, holding me up effortlessly. I stared past him. There, standing near the entrance to the bar, holding 2 glasses of champagne, was Lorenzo. He was pale, ghostly pale. He was staring at us, at me and the man holding me, with an expression of sheer horror. The glasses in his hands were shaking so hard liquid was sloshing over the rims. He took a step back, as if he wanted to run but was glued to the floor by fear. I looked back at the man in my arms. The man with the exact same face. Twins. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The agency hadn't mentioned twins. No one had mentioned twins. You... I stammered, my eyes wide. There are 2 of you. The man didn't look around. He didn't check to see who I was looking at. He knew. Of course he knew. There is only one of me, he growled, the sound vibrating in his chest against mine. The other is a shadow. The music seemed to swell, reaching a crescendo that matched the panic rising in my throat. I tried to pull away, to step back, but his arm was a band of steel. He wasn't letting me go. Let me go, I said, panic finally bleeding into my voice. I don't know what kind of game this is, but I want out. I need to leave. He stopped dancing. We stood dead center of the ballroom, the other couples swirling around us like water around a rock. He released my hand but kept his arm around my waist, pulling me even closer until I had to tilt my head back to look him in the eye. He lowered his head, his lips brushing against the shell of my ear. I shivered violently. You entered a game you do not understand, Clara, he whispered. His use of my name, my real name, sent a shockwave through me. You came here for money. You came here to save a bakery. How do you know that? I gasped. I know everything, he said. He pulled back slightly to look me in the eyes. His gaze was hard, unforgiving, yet strangely possessive. But you made a mistake tonight. A critical error. He tilted his head toward the man by the bar, toward Lorenzo, who looked like he was about to faint. You let him touch you, the stranger said, and his voice dropped an octave, filled with a dark, simmering rage. You let him speak to you. You let him think he could have you. I thought he was my date, I whispered, tears pricking my eyes. I didn't know. Ignorance is not a shield, he said coldly. Then his expression shifted. The hardness remained, but something else flickered in the depths of those dark eyes. Something that looked like ownership. You picked the wrong brother, Bella. Beautiful. The Italian endearment rolled off his tongue like a caress, and a threat intertwined. But now, he continued, his thumb digging into my hip. The mistake is corrected. He didn't wait for me to argue. He didn't ask. He turned us both around, keeping me tucked firmly against his side, his body shielding me from the rest of the room. He began to walk toward the exit. Wait. I tried to dig my heels in, but he was unstoppable. He moved with a momentum that carried me along with him. My purse! I left my purse at the table. I have it, he said, not breaking stride. We cut through the crowd. I glanced toward the bar as we passed. Lorenzo, Matteo, whoever he was, saw us coming. He didn't step forward to claim his date. He didn't shout. He shrank back against the wall, eyes wide with terror, avoiding his brother's gaze entirely. It was pathetic. It was revealing. The man who had been so arrogant 5 minutes ago was now nothing more than a frightened child in the presence of this dark force. The stranger didn't even look at his twin. He walked past him as if he were furniture. a complete and total dismissal that spoke volumes about the power dynamic between them. We burst through the heavy brass doors and out into the cool night air of New York City. The noise of the street was a stark contrast to the stifled atmosphere of the ballroom. The doorman scrambled to open the door of a massive black armored SUV that was idling at the curb, its engine purring like a beast waiting to be unleashed. "Get in," the stranger ordered. I stood on the sidewalk, the cold wind biting through the thin fabric of my silver dress. My mind was racing. Every survival instinct I had was telling me to run, to scream, to call the police. This was kidnapping. This was insane. But then I looked back at the hotel doors. I saw Lorenzo watching us through the glass, his face twisted in a mixture of relief and malice. I remembered his clammy hands. I remembered the way he had looked at me like I was a piece of meat. Then I looked at the man holding the car door open. He stood tall, imposing, his eyes fixed on me with an intensity that promised protection. Even if it came wrapped in danger, he hadn't lied to me. He hadn't made cheap jokes. He had just taken over. "Clara," he said. It was a command, but it was also an anchor. I looked at the dark interior of the car. I thought about the bakery. I thought about the foreclosure notice. I thought about how tired I was of fighting the world alone. I took a breath, stepped forward, and slid into the leather seat. He followed me instantly, the heavy door slamming shut with a finality that echoed in my chest. The lock engaged with a loud click. The world outside, the debt, the bakery, the wrong brother, was gone. I was locked in with the right one, and as the engine revved, I realized with a terrifying clarity that I had just walked willingly into the lion's den. The heavy thud of the armored door sealing shut severed the last connection to the world I knew. Inside the SUV, the air was still and scented with polished leather and the faint, sharp aroma of the man sitting next to me. The silence wasn't empty. It was pressurized, pressing against my eardrums like deep water. I sat rigid against the seat, my hands clutching the beaded purse in my lap as if it were a lifeline. Outside the tinted windows, the city of New York blurred into streaks of neon and shadow, a moving abstract painting that I couldn't focus on. "Drive," the man ordered. His voice was low, devoid of the frantic energy that his brother had displayed, but it carried a weight that made the driver nod instantly. The car surged forward, merging aggressively into the late-night traffic. I turned my head slowly to look at him. Alessandro Verciani. The name felt heavy on my tongue, even though I hadn't spoken it aloud yet. In the confines of the car, he seemed even larger than he had in the ballroom. His legs were spread slightly, claiming the space, his hands resting loosely on his thighs. Hands that could shatter bone or lead a waltz with terrifying precision. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring straight ahead, his profile cut from granite, watching the road with a predator's focus. "You're not taking me home," I said. It wasn't a question. We were heading north, away from my cramped apartment in Queens. "No," he replied, his tone final. "Your home is compromised." "Compromised?" I echoed, a spark of indignation flaring in my chest. "I live in a fourth-floor walk-up with a lock that barely works. It's hardly a fortress to begin with. What does compromised mean?" He finally turned to me. The streetlights passing overhead cast rhythmic shadows across his face, highlighting the sharp angle of his cheekbone and the depths of his dark eyes. There was no pity in his gaze. There was only a cold, clinical assessment of facts. "It means my brother does not lose gracefully," Alessandro said. He reached into the inside pocket of his tuxedo jacket. The movement was smooth, not threatening, but my muscles coiled instinctively. He pulled out a sleek black tablet and tapped the screen once before extending it toward me. "You asked who I was. You asked why I intervened." "Red." I hesitated, looking from his face to the device. "What is this?" "The reason you are sitting here instead of in a hotel suite being laughed at," he said brutally. I took the tablet. My fingers left smudges on the pristine glass. It was open to a messaging app, a private group chat. The timestamp on the messages was from earlier that evening, less than 2 hours ago. My stomach churned as I began to read. User, Maddie V, 8:45 p.m. Target acquired, the redhead from the agency. Elite Dates finally sent something edible. User, Luca Boy, 8:46 p.m. The baker? Didn't think she was your type. Too much flour, not enough silicone. User, Maddie V, 8:48 p.m. She's desperate. I checked her financials. She's drowning in debt. Daddy died and left her a sinking ship. She'll do anything for a payout. I felt the blood drain from my face. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. He had checked my financials. He knew about my father. I forced myself to keep reading, even as bile rose in my throat. User, Luca Boy, 8:50 p.m. 50K says you can't get her to the Plaza Suite before midnight. She looks stiff. Catholic school vibes. User, Maddie V, 8:51 p.m. Watch me. I'll play the charming investor. I'll promise to save her little shop. By 11 Sadir, she'll be on her knees, and I'll have the 50K. Easy money. I stared at the last message. Easy money. I wasn't a person to them. I wasn't a woman struggling to keep a family legacy alive. I was a prop, a bet, a way for rich, bored men to pass the time and exchange money they didn't need. The interaction in the ballroom replayed in my mind. Lorenzo's clammy hands, his invasive questions, the way he had looked at me like he was calculating my depreciation value. He hadn't been nervous because he liked me. He had been nervous because he was on a timer. A sound escaped my throat, a harsh, jagged intake of breath. I didn't cry. I refused to cry. Tears were for people who had the luxury of being soft. And I hadn't been soft since the day the bank sent the first foreclosure notice. Instead of tears, a cold, hard rage settled in my stomach. He bet on me, I said, my voice eerily calm. $50,000. Pocket change to him, Alessandro said. He took the tablet back from my unresisting fingers and slid it away. He didn't want you, Clara. He wanted the victory. He wanted to prove he could break something innocent just because he was bored. And you? I looked at him, searching his face for the same cruelty. What do you want? Did you bet against him? Did I just help you win a different pot? Alessandro's jaw tightened. For a moment, the air in the car grew heavy with ozone, the scent of a coming storm. I do not gamble with people's lives. I end the games my brother starts. Why? I demanded. Why me? Why tonight? You could have let him win. You could have walked away. I could have, he admitted. He shifted, turning his body fully toward me. The leather seat creaked under his weight. But then I saw you. I saw you standing there in that silver dress, looking like you were ready to go to war with the world, but terrified you didn't have the ammunition. You didn't belong in his game. You were misplaced. Misplaced, I scoffed, though the word hit closer to home than I wanted to admit. So you rescued the stray dog. I claimed what was being mishandled. He corrected, his voice dropping an octave. The word claimed sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Matteo breaks toys. I keep them. I am not a toy, I snapped. No, he agreed. You are not. Which is why I took you out of there before he could turn you into one. The car began to slow down. I looked out the window, expecting to see a hotel or a mansion, but the neighborhood was familiar. Too familiar. The knot in my stomach tightened until it was painful. We weren't in Manhattan anymore. We were in Brooklyn. We were 3 streets away from the bakery. Why are we here? I asked, leaning forward. You said my home was compromised. The bakery. I'm Matteo as a child, Alessandro said, his voice devoid of emotion, stating facts like a news anchor reporting a tragedy. When a child has his toy taken away, he throws a tantrum. When Matteo loses a bet, he flips the table. What did he do? My voice rose, panic finally cracking through the anger. Alessandro, what did he do? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The car turned the final corner onto 4th Avenue, and the answer was written in the sky. Orange light flickered against the dark clouds, pulsing like a dying heartbeat. Smoke, thick and black, billowed into the air, choking the streetlights. No, I whispered. No, no, no. The car stopped. Before the driver could even put it in park, I was scrambling for the door handle. It was locked. Open it! I screamed, pounding on the glass. Open the door! Clara! Alessandro's voice was calm, a stark contrast to my hysteria. Wait! Open it! The lock clicked. I shoved the door open and stumbled out onto the pavement. The heat hit me instantly. It wasn't a warm summer breeze. It was a physical wall of scorching air. Mitchell's Patisserie. The place where I had taken my first steps, where I had learned to braid dough before I learned to braid my hair, where my father's apron still hung on the hook in the back office, was gone. The front windows had been shattered. Flames were licking up the brick facade, consuming the awning that we had just replaced last year. The closed sign was melting, dripping like wax onto the sidewalk. Firefighters were there, shouting orders, their hoses blasting streams of water that looked pathetic against the roaring inferno. I stood frozen, the heat searing my face, my silver dress reflecting the destruction of my life. It wasn't just a building. It was my father. It was the smell of his cologne mixed with cinnamon. It was the sound of his laugh. It was the only thing I had left of him. The book, I gasped. The realization hit me like a bullet. The recipe book. It wasn't digital. It was a leather-bound journal, handwritten by my great-grandmother, added to by my grandfather, and finished by my dad. It was sitting on the metal prep table in the kitchen. I have to get it, I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. I took a step toward the police line, then another. I broke into a run. Hey, lady, get back, a fireman shouted. I didn't hear him. I just saw the flames eating the kitchen. I needed to save it. If I lost the book, I lost them. I lost everything. Arms wrapped around my waist. Hard, unyielding bars of iron. I was jerked back with such force that my feet left the ground. Let me go, I screamed, thrashing against the hold. I clawed at the suit jacket, digging my nails in, fighting like a wild animal. My dad's book. It's in there. Let me go. It's gone, Clara. Alessandro's voice roared in my ear, louder than the fire, louder than the sirens. Look at it. It's gone. No. I can save it. Let me go. I kicked backward, my heel connecting with his shin, but he didn't even flinch. He hauled me further back, away from the heat, away from the glass that was exploding outward. You go in there. You die, he growled, spinning me around and pinning me against his chest. He trapped my arms between us, forcing me to look at him instead of the fire. Is that what you want? To die for paper? It's not paper, I sobbed, the fight draining out of me as the reality crashed down. It's him. It's all I have left of him. If that burns, he's really dead. I collapsed against him, my legs giving out. He caught me, holding me upright, absorbing the weight of my grief. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He didn't say, it's okay. He just held me while I watched my legacy turn to ash. The roof of the bakery collapsed with a sickening crash, sending a plume of sparks into the night sky. The crowd gasped. I buried my face in Alessandro's chest, unable to watch anymore. The smell of smoke was everywhere, soaking into my hair, into my dress. He did this. I whispered into the fabric of his lapel. Matteo. Yes, Alessandro said. His heart was beating steady and slow against my cheek, a terrifying contrast to the chaos around us. He sent his men 10 minutes after we left the hotel. He knew he couldn't have you, so he took away the place you were trying to save. I pulled back to look at him. My face was wet with tears, my makeup ruined, my hair a mess. I must have looked like a wreck. But Alessandro looked at me with that same intense focus he had in the ballroom. He thinks this breaks you, Alessandro said. He reached up, his thumb wiping a smudge of soot from my cheek. He thinks that without this building, you are nothing, just a desperate girl with debt. I am, I whispered. I have nothing now. The insurance won't cover arson if they think I did it for the money, and the debt remains. You have nothing, Alessandro repeated. Which means you have nothing to lose. He framed my face with his hands, forcing me to look at him. The firelight danced in his dark eyes, making them look like pools of molten lava. Come with me, he said. To where? I asked weakly. To be your mistress? To be another bet? To be my retribution, he said fiercely. I will rebuild this, Clara, brick by brick. I will make it better than it was. I will clear your debt. I will handle the insurance. I will handle Matteo. And what do I have to do? I asked. Nothing in this world was free. I knew that better than anyone. What is the price, Alessandro? You live in my house, he said. You cook in my kitchen. You stay where I can see you, where I can ensure my brother doesn't finish what he started. I looked over his shoulder at the smoldering ruins of the bakery. The sign was gone. The windows were black holes. There was nothing there for me anymore. No home, no job, no safety. Matteo Verciani had stripped me bare in a single hour because his ego had been bruised. I looked back at Alessandro. He was dangerous. He was a criminal. He was the brother of the monster who did this. But he was also the only person standing between me and the abyss. He had offered me a hand when I was drowning. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, smearing the soot, but clearing my vision. The sadness in my chest began to harden into something else. Something cold and sharp. Survival. You promise? I asked, my voice steadying. You promise you'll help me rebuild? I swear on my name, Alessandro vowed. On my blood. I will give you back your legacy. Then take me away from here, I said. I don't want to smell the smoke anymore. Alessandro nodded once. He didn't smile. This wasn't a victory. It was a salvage operation. He shifted his arm to my shoulders, turning me away from the fire, shielding me from the cameras that were starting to flash as the press arrived. Eyes down, he murmured. Don't let them see you cry. You are with me now. We do not cry for the enemy to see. I straightened my spine. I took a deep breath of the tainted air and let it out. I walked beside him back to the car. The driver held the door open. This time I didn't hesitate. I slid inside, the leather seat cool against my feverish skin. Alessandro got in beside me. The door closed, shutting out the sirens, the fire, and the ruin of my past life. To the mansion, Alessandro ordered. As the car pulled away, I didn't look back. I couldn't. I looked at my hands, stained with soot, resting on the expensive silver fabric of my dress. I had lost the bakery. I had lost the book. But as I glanced at the man sitting silently beside me, his knuckles white as he gripped his knee, I realized I had gained something far more volatile. I had gained a weapon, and I was going to use him to make sure Matteo Verciani regretted the day he ever learned my name. Are you hungry? Alessandro asked quietly, breaking the silence after a few blocks. The question was so mundane, so domestic, that it almost made me laugh hysterically. No, I said. I'm not hungry. You will eat, he stated. Shock burns calories, and you will need your strength. For what? He looked at me, and the darkness in his eyes promised violence and salvation in equal measure. For the war we are about to start, he said. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes. The image of the fire was burned into my eyelids, but the sound of his voice was louder. I was homeless. I was destitute. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't alone. I had picked the wrong brother for a date, but I had accidentally chosen the right one for a war. And as the city lights faded into the trees of the suburbs, heading toward the Verciani estate, I knew that whatever happened next, I wouldn't be the one burning. The car sped on, carrying us into the darkness, binding our fates together with the ashes of my past. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of him, clean, sharp, and dangerous, and let the exhaustion finally take me. I was safe. For tonight, that had to be enough. The silence of the Verciani mansion was heavy, a physical weight that pressed against the eardrums unlike anything I had ever experienced in Brooklyn. In my old apartment, silence was a myth. There was always the hum of the refrigerator, the arguments of the couple next door, the distant siren of a police cruiser. Here, in the sprawling estate nestled in the hills of New Jersey, the silence was absolute. It was the quiet of a museum or a mausoleum. It had been 7 days since the fire. 7 days since I stood on the pavement and watched my father's legacy turn into ash and twisted metal. 7 days since I entered the beast's lair, not as a prisoner, but as a guest with no other options. I stood in the center of the kitchen, a space larger than my entire apartment. and ran my hand over the cold, pristine marble of the island. It was a chef's dream, equipped with a 6-burner Viking range, a walk-in refrigerator, and copper pots that looked like they had never been touched by a flame. That was the problem. This house, much like its master, felt untouched. It was sterile, perfect, and completely devoid of life. Alessandro had given me the East Wing. Your quarters, he had called it, as if we were in a Victorian novel. It had a bedroom with a balcony, a bathroom with a soaking tub deep enough to drown in, and a sitting room I hadn't used. He had provided me with a wardrobe of clothes that fit perfectly, all in muted tones of burgundy, gold, and cream, replacing the soot-stained silver dress I had arrived in. He had been polite, distant, and terrifyingly efficient. But I wasn't a guest. I wasn't a freeloader. And I certainly wasn't going to sit around in silk pajamas waiting for Matteo to finish me off. I checked the time on the industrial clock on the wall. 6 p.m. Alessandro would be home soon. In the week I had been here, I had observed his routine. He left before the sun came up. He returned after the sun went down. He drank black coffee. He rarely ate. The staff, a terrified housekeeper named Maria, and a rotation of stoic security guards, tiptoed around him like he was a sleeping tiger. I tightened the strings of the apron I had found in a drawer. It was stiff, brand new. I rolled up the sleeves of the cashmere sweater he had bought me. Ms. Mitchell? I turned to see Maria standing in the doorway, wringing her hands. She looked at me with a mixture of awe and pity. You don't have to cook, miss, she said, her voice a nervous whisper. We have a chef who comes in on weekends to prep meals, or we can order from the city. Mr. Verciani? He doesn't usually sit for dinner. He needs to eat, Maria, I said, pulling a knife from the magnetic strip. It was perfectly balanced, a Japanese steel blade that sang as I tested the edge against my thumb. And I need to work. If I don't do something with my hands, I'm going to lose my mind. But he didn't ask for... I know, I interrupted gently. But this isn't for him. It's for me. Now, where do you keep the shallots? By the time the front door opened an hour later, the kitchen smelled like home. It didn't smell like lemon pledge and emptiness anymore. It smelled of searing beef, reducing wine, and time. I heard his footsteps before I saw him. They were heavy, rhythmic, the sound of expensive leather on hardwood. He stopped in the doorway. I didn't turn around immediately. I was stirring the risotto, watching the arborio rice release its starch, turning creamy and golden with the saffron I had found in the back of the pantry. Something is burning, he said. His voice was rough, tired. Nothing is burning, I corrected, lowering the heat. That is the smell of caramelization. There is a difference. I turned then. Alessandro was standing there, still in his suit, though he had shed the jacket. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, his tie loosened. He looked exhausted. There were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there the night of the ball. He looked at me, then at the pot on the stove, then back at me. His expression was unreadable. A mask of stone. You are cooking, he stated. I am, I said. I wiped my hands on a towel and leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. We need to talk, Alessandro. About the arrangement. He stiffened slightly. Is the room not to your liking? Do you require something? The room is bigger than my entire childhood home, I said, and the clothes are beautiful. But I'm not a pet. I'm not a charity case. I don't sit around and look pretty while you pay my bills. He walked further into the room, the tension radiating off him in waves. You are not a charity case, Clara. You are a target. Keeping you here is a security measure. It's a cage, I countered. A gilded one. But a cage. And I don't do cages well. My father taught me that you work for what you get. I can't rebuild the bakery if I'm hiding in your East Wing watching Netflix. He stopped in front of the island, placing his hands on the marble. His knuckles were bruised again. Fresh bruises. I wondered whose face had gotten in his way today. What do you propose? He asked, his dark eyes locking onto mine. A trade, I said firmly. I live here. I eat your food. You are handling the insurance and the contractors for the bakery. That costs money. I don't have money, but I have skills. He raised an eyebrow. You want to pay me in pastries? I want to handle your kitchen, I said. Maria is terrified of you. The weekend chef preps bland chicken and leaves. You don't eat. You run on caffeine and adrenaline, and sooner or later, you're going to crash. If I'm going to stay here, I'm going to work. I will run the kitchen. I will cook your meals. I will manage the household supplies. It's a job. You pay off my bakery debt. I keep you fed and alive. We call it even. Alessandro stared at me for a long moment. The silence stretched, filled only by the bubbling of the risotto. I held his gaze, refusing to blink. I needed him to see me not as the victim he rescued from the ballroom, but as a partner, a professional. You want to be my staff, he said slowly. I want to be useful, I corrected, and I want to pay my way. He let out a short breath, almost a sigh. Matteo breaks things, he murmured, more to himself than to me. You try to fix things. Is that a yes? He looked at the stove. What is that smell? Risotto alla Milanese and ossobuco, braised for 3 hours. He looked back at me, and for a second, the mask slipped. I saw hunger there. Not just physical hunger, but a deep, starving need for something warm. Fine, he said. It is a deal, but you do not serve me. We eat together. I do not like eating alone. Deal, I said. That night, for the first time in a week, Alessandro ate a full meal. We sat at the small table in the kitchen, not the long, formal dining table that could seat 20. We ate in relative silence, but it wasn't the oppressive silence of the mansion. It was the companionable silence of two people who were tired of fighting the world. I watched him eat, noting the way his shoulders relaxed after the first few bites, the way the tension lines around his mouth smoothed out. It is good, he said simply, after clearing his plate. It's better than good, I replied, taking a sip of wine. It's my recipe. He looked at me, his eyes dark and intense. You are stubborn, Clara Mitchell. I know, I smiled. It's how I survive. Yes, he said softly. I believe it is. The days fell into a routine, a strange domestic routine set against the backdrop of a mafia war. Alessandro would leave early, usually before I was up, but I would leave a travel mug of coffee and a warm pastry on the counter for him. When I came down, the mug was always gone. I spent my days on the phone with insurance adjusters and contractors, calls that Alessandro had set up. He kept his word. The debris of Mitchell's patisserie was cleared within 3 days. The foundation work was scheduled. He wasn't just throwing money at the problem. He was using his influence to cut through the red tape that would have stalled me for months. But the threat of Matteo hung over us like a storm cloud. Security was tight. Men with earpieces patrolled the perimeter. I wasn't allowed to leave the grounds without an escort, which meant I spent my energy revolutionizing the Versiani kitchen. It was on a Tuesday morning that the boundaries shifted. I was in the foyer, checking a delivery of fresh produce, when Alessandro came down the grand staircase. He was surrounded by 3 men, his lieutenants, I assumed. They were talking in rapid-fire Italian, their voices low and urgent. Alessandro looked lethal. He was wearing a charcoal 3-piece suit, his coat draped over his arm. He looked like a weapon sheathed in silk. He stopped when he saw me. The lieutenant stopped too, looking from him to me with guarded expressions. Clara, he acknowledged, a curt nod. Alessandro, I replied. There are fresh scones in the kitchen if you have time. No time, he said, checking his watch. I have a meeting with the commission. The situation with the docks is escalating. He meant Matteo. I knew enough now to read between the lines. Matteo was squeezing the supply lines, trying to hurt Alessandro's business to leverage a negotiation for his return to the family fold. Alessandro stepped forward, reaching for the door handle, but I stepped into his path. The guards tensed, hands twitching toward their jackets. Alessandro held up a hand to stop them. What is it? He asked, looking down at me. Your tie, I said. He frowned, looking down. The silk tie was crooked, the knot hasty and slightly off-center. It was a small imperfection, but on a man like him, who commanded absolute respect, it was a chink in the armor. It showed he was distracted. It showed he was stressed. It's fine, he said dismissively. It's not, I said. You're going to meet the commission. You have to look like you're in control of everything, including your wardrobe. I reached out. He froze. I saw his throat bob as he swallowed. My hands hovered for a second, giving him a chance to push me away, to tell me to know my place. He didn't move. I stepped closer, invading his personal space. I could smell him. The sharp scent of his soap, the bitterness of espresso, and the underlying warmth of his skin. I reached up and undid the knot. His breathing hitched, a small, barely audible sound. I smoothed the silk, my knuckles brushing against the sensitive skin of his neck. His pulse was hammering against my fingers, fast and hard. You're nervous, I whispered, keeping my eyes on the knot as I retied it. I do not get nervous, he rumbled, his voice vibrating through my fingertips. You're worried about him, I corrected, sliding the knot up until it sat perfectly against his collar. You're worried he's going to do something stupid and force your hand. He didn't deny it. He caught my wrists before I could pull away. His grip was firm, his thumbs pressing into the soft skin of my inner arms. We were standing so close that the buttons of his vest brushed against my chest. The foyer, the guards, the delivery boxes, everything faded away. You see too much, he murmured, his gaze dropping to my lips. I see the man, not the boss, I whispered back. For a heartbeat, I thought he was going to kiss me. The air between us crackled with electricity, thick and heavy. His head lowered an inch, his eyes darkening with intent. My breath hitched. I wanted him to. God help me, I wanted the monster to kiss me. Then, the walkie-talkie on one of the guards crackled. Cars are ready, boss. The spell broke. Alessandro released my wrists, stepping back. The mask slammed back into place, but his eyes were still burning. Stay inside today, he ordered, his voice rougher than usual. Do not go into the gardens. Be safe, I said. He looked at me one last time, touched the knot of his tie, and turned on his heel. Let's go. I watched him leave, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I touched my own wrists where his hands had been. I was in trouble. I was falling for the man who was paying my debts, the man whose brother had burned down my life. And the terrifying part was that he was falling too. But reality has a way of crashing the party. 2 hours later, I was in the library, trying to source a specific type of vintage tile for the bakery floor, when my cell phone rang. It was an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Clara Mitchell? Speaking. This is Mr. Henderson from First National Bank. I'm calling regarding the personal loan attached to the bakery property. The one co-signed by your father. My stomach dropped. Yes? I thought everything was being handled. Mr. Versiani's lawyers said the insurance would cover the rebuild. The insurance covers the structure, Ms. Mitchell, the banker said, his voice clipped and cold. It does not cover the outstanding personal debt your father took out against the land 3 years ago. There is a clause in the contract. In the event of catastrophic destruction of collateral, the bank has the right to call in the full amount of the loan immediately to mitigate risk. Call in. I gripped the phone tighter. How much? $150,000. Due by close of business tomorrow. Tomorrow? I laughed, a shrill, panicked sound. I don't have that kind of money. You know I don't. The bakery burned down. I have nothing. If the amount is not paid, the bank will seize the land. The bakery will not be rebuilt. We have a buyer already lined up who is very interested in the lot. A Mr. M. Versiani. The room spun. Matteo. Of course. He couldn't stop Alessandro from rebuilding the structure, so he had gone after the land itself. He had bought the debt or pressured the bank. It was a legal chokehold. You can't do this, I whispered. It is already in motion, Ms. Mitchell. Unless you have the funds. The line went dead. I sat there, the phone slipping from my hand onto the plush carpet. I was going to lose it. After everything. After the fire. After the humiliation at the ball. After surviving the first week in this house. Matteo was going to win. He was going to take the land, pave over my father's memory, and build a parking lot or a condo just to spite his brother. I couldn't ask Alessandro. I couldn't. He had already done so much. He was rebuilding the building. Asking him for another $150,000 felt like selling the last scrap of my soul. It crossed the line from partnership to paid mistress. I paced the library. I felt trapped. The walls of the mansion, which had started to feel safe, suddenly felt like the cage I had accused them of being. I needed to fix this. But how? I had no assets. No credit. I spent the rest of the afternoon in a daze of panic. I tried calling other banks for a loan. Denied. I tried calling the insurance company. They couldn't release funds yet. I was checkmated. When 7 p.m. rolled around, I hadn't started dinner. I was sitting at the kitchen island, my head in my hands, staring at the foreclosure notice the bank had emailed me. The back door opened. Alessandro walked in. He looked worse than he had in the morning. His jacket was gone, his sleeves rolled up, revealing a bandage on his forearm that was seeping fresh blood. "Clara?" I jumped, shoving the papers under a placemat. "You're back. I'm sorry. I didn't start dinner. I lost track of time." He didn't care about dinner. He crossed the room in 3 strides, grabbing my chin and tilting my head up. "What happened?" he demanded. "You've been crying." "No, I haven't." "Do not lie to me." His thumb brushed my cheekbone. "Who touched you?" "No one touched me," I said, pushing his hand away. "It's nothing. Just stress. The tiles. They don't make the tiles anymore." It was a stupid lie. He knew it. He reached out and flipped over the placemat I had tried to hide. He pulled out the email printout. I tried to snatch it back. "Don't. It's my problem. I'll handle it." He held it out of reach, reading the document with terrifying speed. His eyes narrowed. His jaw clenched until a muscle feathered in his cheek. "Henderson?" He spat the name like a curse. "First National. Matteo is behind it," I said, my voice defeatingly small. "The banker said a Mr. M. Versiani is the interested buyer for the land. He found a loophole, Alessandro. He's going to take the land tomorrow." Alessandro crumpled the paper in his fist. "He takes nothing. It's $150,000, I said. "I can't ask you for that. You're already doing the construction. It's too much. I can't pay you back with cooking. It would take a lifetime." He looked at me, and the anger in his eyes shifted. It wasn't directed at me anymore. It was a cold, calculating resolve. "You think this is about money?" he asked quietly. "Of course it's about money. It's a bank." "No," he said. "It is about territory. And it is about you." He pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed a number. He put it on speaker. "Yes, boss?" a voice answered. "Transfer the funds to First National Bank, the Mitchell account. Full payoff, plus the penalty fees." "Alessandro, don't!" I gasped. "Do it now," Alessandro ordered the phone. "And send Henderson a message. Tell him if he ever calls Ms. Mitchell again, I will buy his bank and fire him on Christmas Eve." "Done," the voice said. Alessandro hung up and tossed the phone onto the counter. He looked at me. "The debt is gone. The land is yours. Forever." I stood there, trembling. "Why? Why did you do that? I told you I didn't want charity." "It is not charity." He slammed his hand on the marble counter, the sound echoing like a gunshot. I flinched. He softened instantly, stepping around the island to stand in front of me. "Clara, look at me." I looked up. "You adjusted my tie this morning," he said, his voice rough. "You cook my food. You make this house livable. You think I care about money? I have more money than God. I don't care about the numbers. I care that you are safe. I care that you stay. I stay. If you lose the land, you run," he said. "I know you. You are proud. If the bakery is gone, you will pack your bags and disappear to start over somewhere else where you don't feel like a failure. And He hesitated, struggling with the words. "I do not want you to disappear." My heart stopped, then restarted at double speed. "You paid $150,000 so I wouldn't leave?" "I paid it to secure my assets," he said, retreating behind his wall of logic. But his eyes betrayed him. "You are essential to the operation of this household." I looked at him. This powerful, broken, dangerous man who threw money at problems because he didn't know how to use words. He had saved my father's legacy not because of the bread, but because he wanted to keep me. I shouldn't have been happy. I should have been offended. But I wasn't. I was grateful. And more than that, I was moved. "I'm not going anywhere," I whispered. He let out a breath, his shoulders sagging. "Good. Now. Is there food? Or do I have to eat the raw ingredients?" I laughed, a wet, teary sound. "Sit down. I'll make something fast." "No," he said. "I will wait. Make the thing you were planning. What is it called? The eggplant thing. Melanzana alla parmigiana?" I asked, surprised. "That takes time. It's comfort food. I have time," he said, pulling a stool up to the island. He watched me as I moved to the fridge. "And I think I need comfort." I pulled out the eggplants, the mozzarella, the basil. I started to slice, the rhythm of the knife soothing my frayed nerves. Alessandro sat there watching me, his presence a heavy, protective weight. "It was my mother's favorite," he said suddenly, his voice low. I paused, knife hovering. "The melanzane?" "Yes. She used to make it on Sundays." Before she died, he hadn't spoken about his parents before. Matteo, he hated it. He wanted steak. But I loved it. I looked at him, realizing the gift he was giving me. He was opening a door. He was letting me in. "Then I'll make it perfect," I promised. I cooked. He watched. We drank wine. The panic of the afternoon faded, replaced by the scent of frying eggplant and simmering tomato sauce. When I finally pulled the bubbling dish from the oven, the cheese golden and crisp, the look on his face was worth every cent of the debt he had paid. We ate straight from the casserole dish, burning our mouths, sitting side by side on the stools. "Thank you," I said quietly, after we had finished. "For the bank. For the land." He reached out and covered my hand with his. His thumb traced the line of my knuckles. "You picked the wrong brother at the ball, Clara. But you are the only one who knows how to feed the right one." I turned my hand over, interlacing our fingers. "I think I picked the right one." He froze. Then, he brought my hand to his lips, kissing the center of my palm. It was an intimate reverence gesture that made my toes curl. "Be careful, tesoro. My treasure," he whispered against my skin. "If you say things like that, I might never let you leave. Maybe I don't want to." I breathed. He looked at me with a hunger that had nothing to do with food. But before he could act on it, before the magnetic pull between us could snap, his phone rang. He ignored it. It rang again, and again. He growled, releasing my hand to snatch the phone. He looked at the screen, and his face went cold. The warmth of the dinner evaporated instantly. "What?" He barked into the phone. He listened for a moment, his eyes locking onto mine. They were no longer the eyes of the man who missed his mother's cooking. They were the eyes of the Mafia Boss. "I'm on my way," he said. He hung up and stood, buttoning his shirt, reaching for his jacket. "What happened?" I asked, standing up too. "Matteo," he said. "He knows I paid the debt. He knows he lost the land. And he just put a hit out on the contractors," Alessandro said, checking the gun holstered at his side. "He's trying to stop the construction by force." He walked to the door, then stopped and looked back at me. "Lock the doors, Clara. Set the alarm. Do not open it for anyone but me. Alessandro, I will be back," he vowed. "I always come back." He disappeared into the night, leaving me alone in the silent kitchen with the empty casserole dish and the lingering taste of wine on my lips. I locked the door. I set the alarm. And then I went to the window, watching the taillights of his car fade into the darkness, praying that the war I had started wouldn't consume the only man who had ever truly fought for me. The fallout from the bank incident was immediate, but not in the way I expected. I thought the war would be fought with guns and fire, like the night the bakery burned. Instead, Matteo Verciani chose a weapon that was slower, stickier, and in some ways more suffocating. Silence followed by noise. For 2 days, the mansion was quiet. Too quiet. Alessandro was on edge, his phone vibrating constantly with messages he read with a dark scowl. Security was doubled at the gates. I spent my time in the kitchen, aggressively kneading dough for focaccia, trying to exorcise the anxiety that had taken up permanent residence in my chest. Alessandro had saved the land, yes. He had paid the debt, but the tension in his shoulders told me the price for that victory was still being calculated. On the morning of the third day, the noise arrived. It didn't come from an explosion, but from a tabloid on the kitchen island. I walked in to find Alessandro staring at the paper, his hands gripping the marble counter so hard his knuckles were white. He didn't look up when I entered. "What is it?" I asked, setting down my basket of herbs from the garden. He slid the paper toward me. The headline was bold, lurid, and printed in a font designed to scream from a newsstand. The Mafia Prince and the Kidnapped Baker. Scandal rocks Versiani Empire. Below it was a grainy photo. It was from the night of the fire. It showed Alessandro holding me back from the flames, his arms wrapped around me, my face buried in his chest. But the caption didn't tell the story of a rescue. It read, "Alessandro Versiani seen restraining Clara Mitchell, daughter of local business owner, as her property burns. Sources say the blaze was set to force Mitchell into compliance. Is the baker of Brooklyn a guest or a prisoner?" I felt the blood drain from my face. "They think you burned it," I whispered. "They think you kidnapped me." "Matteo," Alessandro said. The name was a curse. He leaked the photo. He spun the narrative. He knows he can't touch me physically right now without starting a civil war within the commission, so he attacks the one thing the families value as much as money: stability. "He's trying to make you look like a monster," I said, reading the article. It described me as a helpless victim, and Alessandro as a volatile tyrant who was stealing women off the street. "He is trying to isolate me," Alessandro corrected. He turned away from the counter, pacing the length of the kitchen. "The winter gala is tonight. The heads of the 5 families will be there. The Russians. The Irish. If they believe I am erratic, if they believe I am burning down civilian businesses and kidnapping women for sport, they will back Matteo. They will see him as the stable option. He wants to force a vote of no confidence." I looked at the photo again. I looked at the man pacing the room. The man who had paid $150,000 just so I wouldn't leave. The man who ate my eggplant parmesan like it was a religious experience. "Then we prove them wrong," I said. Alessandro stopped pacing. He looked at me, his dark eyes narrowing. "Clara, this is not a dinner party. This is a Shark Tank. If you walk into that room with me—" "If I don't," I interrupted, walking around the island to stand in front of him. "Then you look guilty. You look like you're hiding me. But if I walk in there, standing next to you, not behind you, then Matteo looks like a liar." He studied me for a long moment, the silence stretching between us. He wasn't looking at me like a boss looking at an employee, or a savior looking at a victim. He was looking at me like a partner. "It will be dangerous," he warned. "They will judge you. They will whisper. Matteo will be there, and he will not be sober. Let him come," I said, lifting my chin. "I've faced foreclosure, fire, and your brother's cheap pickup lines. I think I can handle a few whispers." A slow heat kindled in his eyes. He reached out, his hand cupping my cheek, his thumb brushing over my skin with a reverence that made my breath hitch. "Then get dressed," he said, his voice dropping to that rough velvet timbre that turned my knees to water. "We are going shopping." The boutique Alessandro took me to wasn't a store. It was a fortress of silk and chiffon located in a brownstone on the Upper East Side that didn't have a sign. The windows were frosted. The door was locked until a security guard recognized Alessandro and buzzed us in. Inside, it smelled of lavender and money. A woman with severe glasses and an impeccable suit hurried over. "Mr. Versiani," she said, inclining her head. "We weren't expecting you." "I need a gown," he said, "for the gala. Tonight." "Of course," she said, her eyes flicking to me. There was judgment there. I was wearing jeans and one of Alessandro's oversized sweaters, but she hid it quickly. "For the young lady? What style were you thinking? We have a lovely selection of pastels. Perhaps something modest, too." "No," Alessandro said. He didn't look at the racks. He looked at me. She does not need modest, and she does not wear pastels. She chooses. He walked over to a leather armchair, sat down, and crossed his legs. He gestured to the store. Whatever you want, Clara. Choose something that tells them who you are. It was a test. Or maybe it was a gift. Matteo had treated me like a doll to be dressed up for a bet. Alessandro was giving me the weapon and letting me aim it. I walked through the racks. I touched silks that felt like water and satins that felt like glass. I saw the navy blue dresses, the safe, elegant choice for a mafia wife. I saw the black dresses, the color of mourning and power. But then, in the back, I saw it. It wasn't safe. It wasn't quiet. It was a deep, rich burgundy, the color of expensive wine or fresh blood. It was made of heavy velvet that looked like it could absorb the light. It had long sleeves, a high neck that dipped into a dangerous V in the back, and a slit that went up to the thigh. It was regal. It was bold. It was the color of the heart I was trying to protect. This one, I said. The saleswoman hesitated. That is a very strong color, miss. It is from the vintage collection. It might be too heavy for— Try it on, Alessandro said from his chair. His eyes were fixed on the dress, and I saw a flash of hunger there that he didn't bother to hide. 10 minutes later, I stepped out of the dressing room. The velvet hugged every curve of my body, heavy and protective. The color made my pale skin look luminous, and my red hair look like fire. I had pinned my hair up loosely, letting a few strands fall to frame my face. I wasn't wearing the silver jewelry I had worn to the plaza. I was wearing nothing but the dress and the gold heels the assistant had found. I walked to the pedestal and turned to the mirror. For the first time in weeks, I didn't see the tired girl who cried over bills. I saw a woman who had survived a fire. I looked at Alessandro in the reflection. He had stood up. He was staring at me with an intensity that made the air in the room feel thin. He walked toward me slowly, like he was approaching a wild animal he intended to capture. He stopped right behind me, his dark eyes locking with mine in the glass. Burgundy, he murmured, his voice rough. The color of kings. Do you like it? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He placed his hands on my shoulders, his thumbs rubbing against the velvet. The heat of his palm seeped through the heavy fabric, branding me. I think, he said, leaning down so his breath ghosted against my ear, that if you walk into the gala wearing this, no one will be looking at Matteo. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a velvet box. He opened it to reveal a necklace, a simple heavy gold chain with a single blood-red ruby teardrop. Alessandro, I breathed. I can't. That looks— It was my grandmother's, he said, fastening it around my neck. The cold metal settled against my skin, the ruby resting in the hollow of my throat. She wore it when she took over the business after my grandfather died. It is a symbol, Clara. It means you are under my protection. He turned me around to face him. His gaze swept over my face, the dress, the necklace. You look like a queen, he said. Now let's go show them who rules this city. The winter gala was held at the Metropolitan Opera House. It was a spectacle of wealth that made the plaza event look like a high school prom. The red carpet was lined with photographers, but unlike the chaotic flashing lights of a movie premiere, this press line was controlled, almost silent. These photographers knew who they were photographing. They knew that a bad angle could result in a broken camera, or worse. The air was freezing, winter biting at my exposed skin. But the heavy velvet of my dress kept me warm. Alessandro helped me out of the car. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin, tailored to hide the shoulder holster I knew he was wearing. Stay close, he murmured, offering me his arm. Head up, eyes forward. Do not look at the floor. You bow to no one. I took his arm. His bicep was hard as rock beneath the wool of his coat. I'm ready. We walked up the stairs. As we entered the grand lobby, the hum of conversation died instantly. It wasn't a gradual quiet. It was a guillotine drop of silence. Hundreds of heads turned. I felt the weight of their stares physically. I saw the older men in their dark suits, the dons of the 5 families, assessing me with cold, reptilian eyes. I saw their wives and daughters in their diamonds and furs. whispering behind manicured hands. That's her. The baker, the charity case, the prisoner. I tightened my grip on Alessandro's arm, but I didn't look down. I looked straight ahead, channeling the heat of the fire that had taken my home. I let the burgundy velvet flow around me like armor. Alessandro didn't speed up. He didn't slow down. He walked me through the center of the lobby with an air of absolute, terrifying ownership. He nodded to a few men. Don Rinaldi, the head of the Neapolitan faction. Mr. Petrov, the Russian liaison. But he didn't stop to chat. He was parading me. He was showing them exactly what the tabloid had lied about. I wasn't being dragged. I was walking beside him. "Verciani!" a voice boomed. We stopped. A large man with gray hair and a scar running down his chin stepped into our path. It was Don Ricci. Old school. Dangerous. "Ricci," Alessandro acknowledged, his voice cool. "Bold choice," Ricci said, his eyes flicking to me. "Bringing the civilian. After the unpleasantness in Brooklyn. The papers say she is a flight risk." "The papers are owned by people who sell lies for quarters," Alessandro said smoothly. "Clara is not a flight risk. She is my guest of honor," Ricci hummed, stepping closer to me. He smelled of cigars. "Is that so? Tell me, Signorina, did he pull you from the fire, or did he light the match? It was a trap." If I looked scared, Alessandro looked guilty. If I looked angry, I looked unstable. I met Ricci's gaze. "Mr. Verciani pulled me from the fire. Don Ricci," I said, my voice steady and clear, carrying in the silent lobby. But I suspect the match was lit by someone who is afraid of competition. Ricci's eyebrows shot up. A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. I had just implied Matteo was weak without saying his name. Alessandro's hand tightened on my arm, not in warning, but in approval. "Smart girl," Ricci chuckled darkly. "Let's hope she's fireproof." He stepped aside. We moved toward the ballroom. "You did good," Alessandro whispered. "I'm terrified," I whispered back, my legs trembling under the velvet. "You hide it well. That is all that matters." We entered the ballroom. It was a sea of black ties and designer gowns. And there, holding court near the champagne tower, was Matteo. He looked terrible. His tuxedo was wrinkled, his tie loose. His face was flushed, his eyes glassy. He was holding a glass of whiskey that looked like his fifth of the night. When he saw us, his expression twisted into a snarl that distorted his handsome features into something ugly. He pushed off the table, swaying slightly. The crowd parted around him, sensing the violence radiating off him like heat. "Well, well," Matteo shouted, his voice slurring. The orchestra stopped playing. The room fell silent again. Look who decided to show up. The prince and his project. Alessandro stopped. He released my arm and took a half step in front of me, shielding me partially. "Go home, Matteo. You are drunk." "I'm celebrating," Matteo laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. He stumbled toward us, spilling whiskey on the floor. "I heard you paid off the bank, brother. 150 grand for a patch of burnt dirt. You're losing your touch. Or maybe you just like paying for—" He looked at me, his eyes raking over the dress with disgust. "For damaged goods." The insult hung in the air, toxic and heavy. The room gasped. To insult a woman under protection was bad. To call her damaged goods in front of the commission was suicidal. I felt Alessandro go perfectly still. It was the stillness of a bomb the second before detonation. "Careful," Alessandro said. His voice was soft, but it carried to the back of the room. "You are speaking to my guest." "Guest?" Matteo sneered. "She's a baker, Alessandro. She's a nobody. I broke her little shop, and she came running to you like a stray dog looking for scraps. Look at her, wearing your grandmother's necklace like she deserves it. Take it off her. It's an insult to the family." Matteo reached out. He actually reached out to grab the necklace. It happened in a blur. Alessandro didn't punch him. That would have been too crude. Instead, he caught Matteo's wrist in midair. He twisted it. Hard. There was a sickening pop of cartilage. Matteo shrieked, dropping to his knees. The whiskey glass shattered on the marble floor. Alessandro didn't let go. He held Matteo there, kneeling in the glass and the spilled alcohol, forced to bow before us. "You do not touch her," Alessandro said. He wasn't shouting. He was pronouncing a sentence. "You do not look at her. You do not speak her name." "You're crazy," Matteo gasped, clutching his wrist. "She's nothing. She's just a bet I lost." Alessandro released him with a shove that sent Matteo sprawling backward. Then, Alessandro turned. He didn't look at his brother. He looked at the crowd. He looked at the dons, the wives, the rivals. He walked to the stage where the orchestra was waiting. He took the microphone from the stand. The feedback whined for a split second, then silence. He looked out at the room, searching until his eyes found mine. I stood alone in the center of the floor, the burgundy dress blazing like a beacon. "There have been rumors," Alessandro said, his voice amplified, filling the cavernous hall. "Rumors that the Versiani family is unstable. Rumors that I am acting without reason." He paused. "Let me be clear. The fire in Brooklyn was an act of cowardice committed by a man who cannot accept defeat. It was an attack on a civilian." He stepped off the stage and walked toward me. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. He didn't stop until he was standing right in front of me. He took my hand, the one that wasn't trembling, and raised it. "Clara Mitchell is not a prisoner," Alessandro declared, his voice ringing with power. "She is not a victim. She is under the personal protection of the Versiani head of family. This means that her debt is my debt. Her enemies are my enemies. And her safety?" He looked at Matteo, who was being helped up by 2 embarrassed security guards. "Is my only priority." Alessandro looked back at me. "Anyone who disrespects her, disrespects me. Anyone who touches her, declares war on me. And I have never lost a war." He brought my hand to his lips and kissed the knuckles, right over the spot where I had burned myself on the oven rack days ago. It wasn't a showy kiss. It was a seal. A blood pact made in front of 500 witnesses. "Get him out of here," Alessandro ordered the security team, gesturing to Matteo. "He is no longer welcome at family events." "You can't do this," Matteo screamed as the guards grabbed his arms. "I'm your blood. She's just a girl." "She is a queen," Alessandro said coldly. "You are a drunk." They dragged Matteo out. The doors closed behind him, cutting off his shouts. The silence that followed was terrified, reverent. Alessandro looked at me. "Are you all right?" he whispered, away from the microphone. I looked at him. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would bruise my ribs. He had just claimed me. Not in secret, not in a car, but in front of the entire world that mattered to him. He had exiled his own brother for me. "I'm fine," I breathed. "I'm better than fine." "Good," he said, "because I need air." He took my elbow and guided me not back to the crowd, but toward the French doors that led to the terrace. The crowd stepped back, bowing their heads slightly as we passed. They weren't looking at the baker anymore. They were looking at the boss's woman. We stepped out onto the stone balcony. The winter air hit us instantly, freezing and sharp, but after the heat of the ballroom, it felt clarifying. The city lights of Manhattan sprawled out before us, a grid of gold and diamonds. Alessandro walked to the stone railing and gripped it, staring out at the city. I watched him. I saw the way his chest heaved, the way the adrenaline was slowly bleeding out of him, leaving him raw. I walked over and stood next to him. I didn't say anything. I just placed my hand over his on the cold stone. He turned his hand over and gripped mine, lacing our fingers together. "I didn't plan the speech," he admitted, his voice low. "It was a good speech," I said. "A bit dramatic, but effective." He let out a short, dry laugh. "I broke his wrist. My mother would be ashamed." "Your mother would be proud that you stood up for someone who couldn't stand up for themselves," I said softly. "Matteo he was going to hurt me, Alessandro. Not physically, maybe, but he wanted to strip me of my dignity. He wanted to make me feel small. He succeeded with the fire," Alessandro said. "I wasn't going to let him succeed tonight. He turned to face me, blocking the wind with his body. He looked down at the necklace, his grandmother's necklace, resting against my skin. "You asked me once why I intervened," he said. "Why I took you from the ball. Why I paid the debt. You said it was to secure your assets," I reminded him. I lied. The wind whipped a strand of hair across my face. He reached out and tucked it behind my ear, his fingers lingering on my jaw. His touch was hot, searing against the winter chill. "I did it because I wanted to," he confessed, the words torn from him. "I did it because when I saw you in that silver dress, dancing with a man who didn't deserve to breathe the same air as you, I felt something I haven't felt in 10 years. "What?" I whispered, my breath misting in the air between us. "Possessive," he said. "Territorial. Alive." He stepped closer, eliminating the space between us. My back pressed against the stone railing. There was nowhere to go, and I didn't want to go anywhere. "I didn't save you to settle a score, Clara. I saved you because the thought of you belonging to anyone else, it made me want to burn the city down myself." My heart stuttered. This was it. The line. We were crossing it. "And now?" I asked. "Everyone inside thinks I belong to you now. They think I'm yours." He looked at me, his eyes dark and endless, filled with the reflection of the city lights and a hunger that could consume worlds. "Let them think," he whispered, leaning down until his lips were hovering millimeters from mine. "But tell me, Clara, do they think right?" I looked at the man who had rebuilt my life from the ashes. The man who had faced down his own blood to protect my honor. The man who made me feel like a queen in a velvet dress. I reached up, tangling my fingers in the hair at the nape of his neck. "Yes," I breathed. He didn't hesitate. He crashed his mouth down on mine. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It was fire and ice, velvet and steel. It was the taste of danger and the promise of safety. He kissed me like he was starving, and I kissed him back with everything I had. All the fear, all the gratitude, all the anger at the world, pouring it into him. His arms wrapped around me, lifting me slightly off the ground, crushing me against his chest. I felt the gun holster under his jacket, the hard muscle of his chest, the frantic beating of his heart that matched my own. For a moment, on that balcony, there was no mafia, no debt, no Matteo. There was just us, the baker and the boss, rewriting the rules of the game. When he finally pulled back, we were both gasping for air. His forehead rested against mine. "Let's go home," he growled. "Yes," I said. "Let's go home." But as we turned to leave the terrace, a shadow moved in the corner of my vision. A flicker of movement from the street below. I looked down, but there was nothing there. Just the empty street and the waiting cars. I shivered, but Alessandro wrapped his coat around my shoulders, pulling me into his side. "I have you," he promised, and for tonight, under the burgundy velvet and the winter stars. I believed him. I had picked the right brother, and I was never, ever giving him back. The storm that battered the Versiani estate that night felt less like weather and more like a premonition. Rain lashed against the reinforced glass of the East Wing's balcony doors, the sound rhythmic and violent, drowning out the silence that usually suffocated the mansion. I lay in the center of the massive bed, staring up at the intricate plaster molding of the ceiling, unable to close my eyes. My body was exhausted, drained by the adrenaline of the gala and the emotional whiplash of the last 48 hours. But my mind was a live wire. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Alessandro on the balcony. I felt the rough stone railing against my back, the biting winter wind on my face, and the searing heat of his mouth on mine. It hadn't been a performance. The speech in the ballroom might have been calculated to silence the commission. But the kiss, that was raw. It was acclaiming. I touched my lips, half expecting them to still feel bruised. He hadn't come to my room tonight. After we returned from the city, he had retreated to his study in the West Wing, claiming he had urgent calls to make regarding the fallout with Matteo. He had kissed my forehead at the bottom of the stairs, his eyes dark and heavy with unsaid words, and told me to lock my door. Sleep, he had ordered, though he looked like he hadn't slept in a decade. "I will secure the house." I had obeyed. I had locked the heavy oak door, engaged the deadbolt, and even propped a heavy chair under the handle. A habit from my days living alone in a bad neighborhood in Brooklyn. It felt silly in a fortress like this, guarded by men with earpieces and assault rifles, but old habits died hard. I turned over, burying my face in the silk pillowcase that smelled faintly of lavender detergent. The storm outside intensified, a crack of thunder shaking the floorboards. Somewhere deep in the house, a floorboard creaked. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. I strained my ears, listening through the drumming of the rain. The mansion was old. It settled and groaned like a living thing. It was probably nothing. Probably just the wind. But the hair on the back of my arms stood up. It was that instinct again. The same one that had screamed at me in the ballroom before I even knew Mateo was the wrong brother. I sat up slowly, clutching the duvet to my chest. The room was pitch black, save for the occasional flash of lightning that illuminated the furniture in ghostly bursts of white light. The handle of my bedroom door turned. It was a slow, deliberate movement. The metal latch clicked, hitting the resistance of the deadbolt. Then silence. "Alessandro?" I whispered, my voice trembling. He wouldn't try to enter without knocking. He had been scrupulously respectful of my space since I arrived. He treated the East Wing like a sanctuary he wasn't allowed to violate. There was a pause. Then, a scratching sound. Metal on metal. It sounded like a pick working the lock. My heart hammered against my ribs. Security had the master keys. Alessandro had the key. No one needed to pick a lock in their own house. I scrambled out of bed, my bare feet silent on the plush carpet. I didn't run to the door. I ran to the bedside table. I opened the drawer with shaking hands and pulled out the taser Alessandro had given me 3 days ago. "It is not a toy," he had said, pressing the cold plastic into my palm. "It delivers 50,000 volts. If anyone touches you who isn't me, you use it. You do not hesitate." I gripped the weapon, flipping the safety off. The small red light blinked to life in the darkness. The deadbolt slid back with a heavy thud. I backed away toward the balcony, putting the heavy armchair between me and the door. The chair I had propped under the handle scraped against the floor as the door was pushed open. A figure stepped into the room. Lightning flashed, illuminating him for a split second. It was Alessandro. He was wearing the same black dress shirt he had worn earlier, unbuttoned at the top, sleeves rolled up. His hair was messy, wet, as if he had been out in the rain. He stood in the doorway, his silhouette imposing, filling the frame. I lowered the taser slightly, relief washing over me so intensely it almost made my knees buckle. "Alessandro," I breathed, letting out a shaky laugh. "You scared me. Why did you pick the lock?" I would have opened it. He didn't answer. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him softly. The click of the latch sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. "I didn't want to wake you," he whispered. His voice was a low rumble, barely audible over the storm. He walked toward me, his movements fluid, but strange. There was a heaviness to his step, a lack of that precise, predatory grace I had come to associate with him. "It's late," I said, confusion creeping back in. "Is everything okay? Did something happen with the commission?" "Everything is fine," he murmured. He was closer now, rounding the foot of the bed. I needed to see you. I needed to know you were still here." It was exactly what I wanted to hear. It was the vulnerability I had seen on the balcony. So why was every nerve in my body screaming danger? He reached out for me. "Come here, Clara." I took a step forward, drawn by the pull he always had on me. But as I moved, the air shifted. He was close enough now that I could smell him. I stopped dead. Alessandro smelled of expensive scotch, rain, and clean linen. It was a sharp, cold scent. The man standing 3 feet away from me smelled of stale bourbon, sweat, and a cloying cheap cologne that tried to mask the odor of unwashed skin. It wasn't him. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The silhouette was right. The height was right. The voice was a terrifyingly close mimicry. But the smell was wrong. "You're not Alessandro," I whispered, horror icing my veins. The figure froze. A flash of lightning lit up the room again, longer this time. It illuminated his face. It was Alessandro's face. The same bone structure, the same dark eyes. But the expression was twisted, manic. The eyes weren't stoic and controlled. They were bloodshot and wild, dancing with a chaotic malice. Matteo. He grinned, and it was a grotesque parody of his brother's rare smiles. Smart girl. Matteo hissed, dropping the whisper. His voice was slurred, wet with alcohol. You always were too smart for your own good. That's what he likes about you, isn't it? The brain, the little fire. How did you get in here? I demanded, backing away until my legs hit the chair. I kept the taser hidden behind the fold of my silk robe. The security, the alarms, the tunnel. Matteo laughed, a low, ugly sound. He took another step toward me, his movements jerky. Did he forget to tell you? The old wine cellar has a delivery hatch that leads to the old prohibition tunnels. We used to play hide and seek down there when we were kids. Alessandro thinks he sealed it years ago. He thinks he knows everything. But he forgot I have a memory too. He was drunk, dangerous, and he was in my bedroom. Get out, I said, my voice steady despite the terror clawing at my throat. Alessandro will kill you if he finds you here. Alessandro is busy, Matteo sneered. I tripped the perimeter alarms on the west gate. He's out there right now, running around in the rain with his dogs, looking for a threat that isn't there, while the real wolf walked right through the back door. He lunged. It wasn't a seductive move. It was an attack. He cleared the distance between us in a second, his hand shooting out to grab my throat. I didn't scream. I didn't freeze. I remembered the weight of the gun in the car, the lessons Alessandro had whispered to me about survival. You do not hesitate. I sidestepped his grab, dropping to my knees, and thrust the taser upward into his exposed stomach. I pulled the trigger. The crackle of electricity was deafening in the small space. Matteo convulsed, a guttural scream tearing from his throat as 50,000 volts locked his muscles. He collapsed backward, crashing into the bedside table, shattering the lamp. I didn't wait to see if he was down. I scrambled over the bed, making for the door. You bitch, he roared. He was fast. Too fast. The drugs or the alcohol must have dulled the pain, or maybe the taser hadn't connected fully through his thick coat. I felt a hand clamp around my ankle. I fell hard, my chin hitting the carpet. He dragged me back, away from the door. I kicked out, my heel connecting with his shoulder, his face, anything I could reach. He crawled on top of me, his weight crushing the air from my lungs. He wasn't smiling anymore. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. You think you're special? He spat, saliva hitting my cheek. He pinned my wrists above my head with one hand. You're nothing. You're a baker, a peasant, and you ruined me. You ruined yourself, I screamed, bucking my hips, trying to throw him off. He humiliated me, Matteo shrieked, his voice cracking. In front of the commission, he broke my wrist. He took my birthright, and he did it for you. He reached into his boot with his free hand. Metal flashed in the darkness. A knife. A serrated hunting knife. If I can't have the family, Matteo whispered, pressing the cold blade against the pulse of my neck. Then he doesn't get to have the girl. I stared up at him, at the eyes that were so like Alessandro's but completely empty of his soul. I knew with absolute certainty that he was going to kill me. Not for money, not for a bet, but because I was the only thing he could break to hurt his brother. Do it, I gasped, staring him down. But he will hunt you to the ends of the earth. Let him come. Matteo raised the knife. The door to the bedroom exploded inward. It didn't open. It shattered. The wood splintered around the lock as a force of nature kicked it in. Matteo flinched, turning his head. Alessandro stood in the ruins of the doorway. He was dripping wet, his chest heaving, a gun in his hand. But he didn't fire. He couldn't. Matteo was on top of me. The shot was too risky. Alessandro didn't need the gun. He dropped it. He moved faster than I thought a human being could move. He was a blur of darkness and violence. He crossed the room and tackled Matteo off me. the force of the impact sending them both crashing into the wardrobe. The wood cracked. Mirrors shattered, raining shards of glass onto the carpet. I scrambled backward, gasping for air, clutching my throat where the knife had pressed. The two brothers were a tangle of limbs on the floor. It was like watching a mirror image fight itself. They had the same build, the same strength, but Alessandro fought with a cold, terrifying precision, while Matteo fought with the desperate flailing of a drowning man. Matteo slashed with the knife. Alessandro caught his wrist, the same one he had broken at the gala. He twisted it. The sound of the bone snapping again was sickening, a wet crunch that made my stomach turn. Matteo screamed, dropping the knife. Alessandro didn't stop. He punched Matteo in the face. Once, twice, 3 times. Each blow was a heavy, meaty thud. He wasn't fighting to subdue. He was fighting to erase. "You touched her!" Alessandro roared, his voice unrecognizable. It was guttural, animalistic. I told you what would happen." He dragged Matteo up by the lapels of his jacket and slammed him against the wall. Matteo's face was a ruin of blood and bruises. He was barely conscious, his legs dragging on the floor. Alessandro wrapped his hands around Matteo's throat. His biceps bulged, the veins in his neck straining. He was going to kill him, right here, right now. He was going to snap his own twin's neck. "Alessandro!" I screamed. He didn't hear me. His eyes were fixed on his brother's face, wide and unseeing, lost in the red haze of berserker rage. "Die," Alessandro whispered. "Just die." Matteo clawed feebly at Alessandro's hands, his eyes rolling back in his head. I couldn't let this happen. Not because I cared about Matteo. I wanted him dead for what he had done, but because if Alessandro killed his brother with his bare hands in my bedroom, he would never come back from it. It would destroy the part of him that was still human. It would make him exactly what Matteo claimed he was. A monster. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the glass cutting into my bare soles. I ran to them. I didn't pull on Alessandro's arm. I knew I couldn't move him. I placed my hands on his face. "Alessandro!" I shouted, forcing him to look at me. "Look at me!" He didn't blink. His grip tightened. Matteo made a choking, gurgling sound. "Alessandro, stop!" I pleaded, pressing my forehead against his cheek. I could feel the heat radiating off him, the tremors of rage shaking his massive frame. "He's defeated. It's over. Don't do this. He touched you." Alessandro rasped, his eyes still locked on Matteo. "He held a knife to your throat. And he failed," I said firmly. "I'm alive. I'm right here. But if you kill him now, you lose. You become him." Alessandro's eyes flickered. He looked down at me. He saw the terror in my face. Not terror of Matteo, but terror for him. "Don't stain your soul for him," I whispered, my thumb stroking his cheekbones, smearing the blood that had splattered there. "And please, don't dirty the carpet. I just got the stain out from the wine." It was an absurd thing to say. Ridiculous. But it was domestic. It was grounding. It was something Clara the baker would say, not a mafia victim. It broke the trance. Alessandro blinked. The murderous haze receded, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. He looked at his brother's purple, gasping face. He looked at his own hands wrapped around Matteo's throat. He released him. Matteo crumbled to the floor like a puppet with cut strings, coughing and retching, curling into a fetal position. Alessandro stepped back, chest heaving. He looked at his hands, then at me. He reached out, touching my neck where the knife had been. "Did he cut you?" he asked, his voice shaking. "No," I said. "Just a scratch. I'm okay." He pulled me into him, burying his face in my hair. He held me so tight it hurt, but I didn't complain. I held him back, anchoring him to the earth. "I should have checked the wine cellar," he muttered into my hair. "I should have known. I was arrogant." "You came," I said. "That's what matters." The sound of running footsteps echoed in the hallway. The security team finally arrived, guns drawn, looking panicked. They stopped at the door, taking in the scene, the shattered wardrobe, the unconscious brother on the floor, the boss covered in rain and blood holding me. "Boss!" the head of security gasped. We The West Gate alarm was a diversion, Alessandro said coldly, not letting go of me. He turned to face his men, his mask of command sliding back into place, though it was cracked. My brother utilized the old prohibition tunnel. Secure it. Weld it shut. Pour concrete into it if you have to. Yes, sir, and… Him? The guard pointed at Matteo. Alessandro looked down at his twin. There was no love left in his eyes. There wasn't even hate. There was just nothing. Take him to the holding cell in the basement, Alessandro ordered. Call the doctor to set his arm. I want him conscious for the council meeting. You're not… killing him? The guard asked, surprised. Death is too easy, Alessandro said. He wants to be a martyr. I'm going to make him a ghost. The guards dragged Matteo out. He groaned as they moved him, leaving a smear of blood on the pristine cream carpet. Alessandro watched them go, then turned back to me. He looked at my feet. You're bleeding, he said. I looked down. There were small cuts on my feet from the mirror shards. It's fine. I didn't feel it. He didn't speak. He scooped me up into his arms, carrying me out of the ruined bedroom. He didn't take me to the guest room. He walked down the hall to the west wing to his own suite. He kicked the door open and carried me into his bathroom. He set me down on the edge of the massive marble tub. He grabbed a first aid kit from the cabinet and knelt at my feet. He cleaned the cuts with gentle, precise movements, his large hands incredibly tender. He didn't look up as he worked. This house is compromised, he said quietly. Matteo is in the basement, I reasoned. It's over. No, Alessandro said, bandaging my foot. He sold the root. I heard him muttering it when I had my hands on his throat. He didn't just come here to kill you. He came here to create a distraction while he signaled the Russians. He stood up, washing the blood from his hands in the sink. He looked at me in the mirror. They know the layout now. They know the security protocols. Matteo has been talking to Petrov for weeks. The West Gate alarm wasn't just him. It was a test run. He turned around. We cannot stay here. Where do we go? I asked. The bakery is a construction site. My apartment isn't safe. There is a safe house, Alessandro said. In the Catskills. It is off the grid. No digital footprint, no tunnels. When do we leave? Now, he said. Pack a bag. Warm clothes. We leave in 10 minutes. Alessandro, I said, stopping him as he moved to the door. Are you okay? He stopped. He looked at his hands again. I almost killed him, Clara. I wanted to. I enjoyed the thought of it. But you didn't, I reminded him. You chose not to. I chose you, he corrected. I stopped because you asked, not because I felt mercy. He walked over to me, cupping my face. That is why I need you. You are the only thing keeping me from becoming him. He kissed me hard, a kiss that tasted of iron and desperation. Get dressed, he ordered, pulling away. The car will be waiting. I nodded, rushing to grab what I could. But as I threw sweaters into a duffel bag, a cold knot of dread settled in my stomach. We had survived the fire. We had survived the invasion. But now we were running. And in my experience, running only worked for so long before the wolves caught up. I looked at the burgundy dress hanging in the closet, the armor I had worn to the gala. I left it there. Where we were going, velvet wouldn't save me. I grabbed the heavy boots, the jeans, and the taser. 10 minutes later, we were in the armored SUV, speeding away from the mansion as the storm raged on. Alessandro drove this time, his knuckles white on the wheel. I watched the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights following us. There was nothing but rain and darkness. But as the silhouette of the Versiani estate disappeared behind the trees, I knew the war wasn't over. It had just moved to a new battlefield. The rendezvous point was a derelict warehouse on the edge of Yonkers, a skeletal structure of rusted steel and broken concrete that looked abandoned to the rest of the world. To Alessandro Versiani, it was a staging ground. We had switched vehicles there. Leaving the SUV, we had fled the mansion in for something that looked less like a car and more like a tank wrapped in civilian luxury. It was a customized, armored transport, black and imposing, sitting in the center of a convoy of 3 identical vehicles. I sat in the back of the middle vehicle, my hands trembling slightly in my lap. I clasped them together to stop the motion, hating the physical betrayal of my nerves. Beside me, Alessandro was a statue of concentrated energy. He was on the phone, speaking in rapid-fire Italian, his voice low and lethal. He hadn't touched me since we got into the new car. He was in war mode, his mind moving pieces on a chessboard I could barely see. "The route is compromised," he said into the phone, then listened. "No. Matteo didn't just sell the location of the mansion. He sold the contingency plans. He knows about the Catskills." My stomach dropped. The safe house. He hung up and looked at the partition separating us from the driver and the bodyguard in the front seat. "Silas," he barked. "Change the route. Take the secondary mountain pass. Stay off the main highway." "Yes, boss," the driver replied, his eyes meeting Alessandro's in the rearview mirror. Silas was a mountain of a man, former special forces, with a neck as thick as a tree trunk. If he was worried, he didn't show it. Alessandro turned to me. In the dim blue light of the car's interior, the bruises on his knuckles, fresh from beating his brother, looked black. He reached out and covered my clasped hands with his own. His palm was warm, rough, and grounding. "We are going dark," he said. "No phones. No signals. The Russians have tech that can triangulate our position if we stay connected." "The Russians?" I whispered. "Matteo sold us to the Bratva?" "He sold a map," Alessandro corrected, his thumb rubbing over my knuckles. "He told Petrov where to find us. Petrov has wanted my territory for 5 years. Matteo gave him the key to the front door." "Why?" I asked, though I knew the answer. "Why would he destroy his own family? Because if he can't rule the kingdom, he would rather see it burn," Alessandro said. "He is a child with a matchbox." The convoy began to move. We rolled out of the warehouse and onto the dark, slick roads leading north. The rain had turned into a mix of sleet and snow as we climbed in elevation, coating the windshield in a gray slush that the wipers fought to clear. I leaned my head back against the leather seat, closing my eyes. I tried to summon the feeling of the velvet dress, the power I had felt at the gala, but it felt like a lifetime ago. Tonight I was wearing jeans and heavy boots, a fugitive in a war I hadn't started. "Distinctive," Alessandro murmured. I opened my eyes. He was watching me. "What?" "You are thinking too loud," he said. "Stop calculating the odds, Clara. That is my job." "I'm not calculating odds," I admitted. "I'm thinking about the eggplant parmigiana. It's still sitting on the counter. Cold." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, softening the harsh lines of his face. "When this is over, I will buy you 1,000 eggplants. We will make a feast." "When this is over," I repeated. The words hung in the air, fragile and heavy. The car banked sharp left, leaving the paved road for a gravel track that wound up into the dense forest of the Catskills. The trees pressed in on either side, tall pines weighed down by snow, creating a tunnel of shadows. The convoy slowed. The lead car was about 50 yards ahead, its taillights 2 red eyes in the darkness. The tail car was the same distance behind. "Silas, status," Alessandro commanded. "Visibility is poor, boss," Silas reported. "Thermal is picking up deer, but nothing else. We're 5 miles from the safe house. 5 miles. 10 minutes. I started to relax. Just a fraction. I looked out the window at the passing trees. Then the world exploded. It didn't start with a sound. It started with a flash, a blinding white-hot streak of light that tore through the darkness ahead of us. It struck the lead car. The impact was visceral. The vehicle 50 yards ahead of us didn't just stop. It disintegrated. The fuel tank ignited instantly, sending a fireball rolling into the night sky, turning the snow into steam. The concussion wave hit us a second later, shaking our heavy armored car like a toy. "RPG!" Silas screamed, slamming on the brakes. "Ambush! Ambush front!" "Reverse!" Alessandro roared, throwing his arm across my chest to pin me to the seat. "Get us out of the kill box!" Silas shifted gears, the engine screaming as he tried to back up. But before we could move more than a few feet, a second explosion rocked the world behind us. The tail car. They had hit the front and the back. We were trapped. "They boxed us in," Alessandro snarled. He reached for the door handle, his other hand going for his gun. "Get down, Clara! On the floor!" I unbuckled my seatbelt and scrambled down into the footwell, curling into a ball. RPG! 3 o'clock! Silas yelled. I looked up just in time to see a trail of smoke rushing toward the passenger side of our car. Alessandro dove on top of me, covering my body with his. The impact was deafening. The missile didn't penetrate the cabin, the armor held, but the force of the blast lifted the 3-ton vehicle into the air. We flipped. Once. Twice. The world became a violent centrifuge of breaking glass, screaming metal, and darkness. The car landed on its side with a bone-jarring crash that knocked the wind out of me. Silence. For a long moment, there was only the high-pitched ringing in my ears and the hiss of escaping steam. I blinked, trying to make sense of the orientation. I was lying on the ceiling of the car, or the door. I couldn't tell. Alessandro, I croaked. The air was thick with dust and the acrid smell of propellant. Clara, his voice was strained, tight with pain. I shifted, pushing debris off my legs. The emergency lights flickered on, bathing the interior in a ghostly red glow. Alessandro was above me, or beside me, depending on the angle. He was pinned. The roof of the car had buckled on his side, crushing inward. His right leg was trapped tight under the crumpled metal of the front seat partition. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, reaching out to touch my face. His hand was shaking. Blood was running down his temple from a cut on his hairline. "I'm fine," I said, scrambling to my knees. "I'm okay. But you're stuck." I tried to push against the metal beam trapping his leg. It didn't budge. It was solid steel, bent like a paperclip by the force of the explosion. "Leave it!" he gritted out, wincing as he tried to pull his leg free. "Silas! Status!" There was no answer from the front. I looked through the shattered remains of the partition. Silas was slumped over the steering wheel. A piece of shrapnel from the windshield had... I looked away, bile rising in my throat. Silas was gone. The bodyguard next to him was motionless. "They are dead," I whispered. "Then we are alone," Alessandro said. He stopped struggling and looked at me. His eyes were clear, focused, terrifyingly calm. "Clara, listen to me. They will come to check the kill. They won't fire another RPG because they want to confirm the body. They want to see me dead." "We have to get you out," I said, panic rising. "There is no time," he said. "You have to go." "No," I said instantly. "I'm not leaving you." "You are small," he said, ignoring my refusal. "You can fit through the gap in the rear window. The glass is broken. Crawl out. Run into the trees. Hide. Do not come out until you see the backup team. I am not leaving you here to be executed." I screamed at him, grabbing his lapels. "If you stay, you die," he roared back, the vein in his neck bulging. "Go. That is an order." "I don't work for you anymore," I yelled. "I'm your partner, remember?" I looked around the cabin frantically. We were sitting ducks. If the Russians walked up to the car, they would shoot us through the gaps in the armor. We had no angle. We were trapped in a steel coffin. My eyes landed on the front section of the cabin. The bodyguard, his name was Marco, I remembered with a pang of guilt, had a weapon, an assault rifle. It had fallen from his hands and was lying on the roof of the car, just within reach of the broken partition. I looked at Alessandro. He was trying to reach his own handgun, but the angle of the crush made it impossible to draw from his holster. He was defenseless. "They're coming," Alessandro whispered. I could hear it now, crunching snow. Voices shouting in Russian. They were moving in. I didn't think. I didn't calculate. I moved. I squeezed my body through the jagged hole in the partition, ignoring the glass that sliced into my jacket. I reached out and grabbed the cold metal of the rifle. It was heavy, heavier than I expected. It smelled of oil and death. "Clara, no!" Alessandro shouted, realizing what I was doing. "Get back! You don't know how to use that!" I pulled the rifle back into the rear cabin. I checked the magazine like Alessandro had shown me that day in the library, when he insisted I know the basics of every weapon in the house. "It is simple mechanics," he had said, guiding my hands. "Magazine in, bolt forward, safety off, point and squeeze. Do not close your eyes." I crawled toward the rear window, the one Alessandro had told me to use for escape. It was shattered, leaving a jagged opening about 2 feet wide. I peered out. Through the snow and the smoke of the burning lead car, I saw them. Shadows moving in the tree line. 6 men. They were moving tactically, weapons raised, closing in on our overturned vehicle. They were confident. They thought everyone inside was dead or incapacitated. I rested the barrel of the rifle on the rim of the broken window. The metal was freezing against my cheek. "Clara," Alessandro said, his voice pleading. "Don't do this. Give me the gun." "You can't shoot from there," I said, my voice sounding strange, detached. "You can't see them." "I can. They will kill you," he groaned, thrashing against the metal trapping his leg. "Not if I kill them first," I whispered. I settled the stock of the rifle against my shoulder. I took a deep breath, the freezing air filling my lungs. I thought about the bakery. I thought about the fire. I thought about Matteo's knife at my throat. I thought about Alessandro bleeding on the floor of this car. I wasn't a baker anymore. I wasn't a victim. I was the woman holding the line. I lined up the sights on the closest shadow. Point and squeeze. I pulled the trigger. The noise was apocalyptic. It wasn't a bang. It was a concussive slap that rattled my teeth. The recoil kicked into my shoulder, harder than I expected, throwing my aim off. The first shot went wide, hitting a tree and sending a spray of bark into the air, but it did its job. The Russians froze. They hadn't expected resistance. "Contact! Contact rear!" one of them shouted. I didn't stop. I remembered Alessandro's voice. "Suppressive fire. You don't have to be a sniper. You just have to make them afraid to lift their heads." I squeezed the trigger again and again and again. Bang, bang, bang. The rifle bucked in my hands, a living thing spitting fire. I saw one of the shadows drop, not dead, but scrambling for cover behind a rock. "Get back!" I screamed, the sound tearing from my throat raw and primal. Bullets began to ping against the hull of our car. Sparks flew as rounds deflected off the armor plating. I ducked down, covering my head as glass and metal fragments rained down on me. "Clara!" Alessandro's hand found my ankle. He was gripping me so hard it hurt. "Stay down!" "If I stay down, they flank us," I yelled back. I popped up again. They were moving to the left, trying to circle around to the side of the car where the undercarriage was exposed. I swung the barrel of the rifle. I saw a man running through the snow, a dark silhouette against the white ground. I led him, just like I led the piping bag on a cake. I fired. The man jerked violently, spinning around before collapsing into the snow. I stopped breathing for a second. I had just shot someone. "Keep firing!" Alessandro roared from the darkness behind me. "Don't think about it. Keep them back." His voice snapped me out of the shock. He was right. If I stopped to process the morality of it, we were dead. I fired again, spraying the tree line where the others were hiding. The magazine clicked dry. "Empty!" I shouted, panic flaring. "Grab the spare," Alessandro commanded. "On the vest! Marco's vest!" I scrambled back to the partition. I reached through, patting down the dead bodyguard's chest until my fingers found the hard plastic of a spare magazine. I ripped it free. My hands were shaking so hard I dropped it. "Calm." Alessandro's voice was suddenly soft, right in my ear. He had managed to twist his body, dragging himself as close as the crushed metal would allow. He reached out and placed his hand over my trembling ones. "Slow is smooth. Smooth is fast. Breathe, Clara." I took a breath. I picked up the magazine. I slammed it into the receiver and hit the release. The bolt snapped forward. "I'm ready," I said. "They will rush now." Alessandro warned. "They know you reloaded. Watch the right flank." I moved back to the window. Sure enough, 2 of them were sprinting toward us, using the smoke from the burning lead car as cover. I leveled the rifle. The fear was gone. It had burned away, leaving only a cold, hard clarity. This was my territory. This was my man. I opened fire. The first man dove into the snow. The second one kept coming, raising his weapon. I saw the muzzle flash of his gun. A bullet whizzed past my ear, So close I felt the wind of it. I didn't flinch. I aimed at his center of mass. I pulled the trigger. He fell. He didn't get up. 2 down, I called out. Hold the line, Hatesoro. My treasure, Alessandro said. Backup is 3 minutes out. I tracked the transponder. 3 minutes. It sounded like an eternity. For the next 180 seconds, I waged a one-woman war in the frozen woods of the Catskills. Every time a shadow moved, I fired. Every time they tried to advance, I forced them back. My shoulder was throbbing, my ears were ringing, and my fingers were numb from the cold. But I didn't stop. I was the wall. I was the shield. Then, I heard it. Not the crack of rifles, but the heavy, rhythmic thrumming of rotors. Lights appeared above the tree line, blinding spotlights cutting through the snow. A helicopter. A Black Hawk, unmarked, screaming in low over the treetops. Friendly, Alessandro shouted. It's the extraction team. The Russians realized it too. They broke cover, running back into the deep woods, abandoning the fight. I didn't stop aiming until the helicopter touched down in the small clearing 50 yards away. Men in tactical gear poured out, moving with the same lethal efficiency Alessandro possessed. They secured the perimeter in seconds. Clear, one of them shouted. Only then did I lower the rifle. My strength left me all at once. The adrenaline crash was brutal. I slumped against the side of the overturned car, gasping for air, the rifle slipping from my numb fingers. Clara, Alessandro called out. I turned to him. The red emergency light painted his face in shadows. He was still pinned, still trapped, but he wasn't looking at his leg. He was looking at me. There was awe in his eyes, and something else. Something that looked like worship. You're alive, I whispered, reaching out to touch his face. Because of you, he said. He caught my hand and pressed it to his lips. I told you to run. I told you I don't work for you, I said, a hysterical laugh bubbling up in my throat. The rear doors of the armored car were ripped open by the rescue team. Boss! The team leader, a man named Dante, no relation to the brother, looked inside. We have the jaws. We'll get you out. Get her first, Alessandro ordered. Check her for injuries. I'm fine, I said, waving them off. Get the metal off his leg. It took them 10 minutes to cut him free. 10 minutes of grinding metal and sparks. I stayed right there, holding his hand, refusing to leave the car until he did. When they finally pulled the beam back, Alessandro groaned, his face going pale, but he didn't cry out. They pulled him from the wreckage. He couldn't stand. His right leg was a mess of torn trousers and blood, but he was alive. They loaded him onto a stretcher. I walked beside him as they carried him toward the helicopter. The snow was crunching under my boots, stained pink with blood. Some of it mine, some of it from the men I had shot. Before they lifted him into the chopper, Alessandro grabbed the medic's arm. Wait, he looked at me. He reached out his hand. I took it. You didn't just hold the line, he whispered, his voice rough with pain and pride. You became the line. I was protecting my investment, I said, trying to joke. But my voice broke. You still owe me a bakery. He pulled me down, ignoring the medics, ignoring the spinning rotors, and kissed me. It wasn't the searing kiss of the balcony. It was a desperate, grounding kiss. A kiss of survival. I owe you my life, he said against my lips, and I pay my debts. He released me, and they loaded him in. I climbed in after him, sitting on the bench seat opposite the stretcher. I looked down at my hands. They were covered in grease, soot, and blood. They were shaking again. But as the helicopter lifted off, leaving the burning wreckage and the dead bodies in the snow below, I realized the shaking wasn't fear. It was the aftershock of power. I looked at Alessandro. He was watching me, his dark eyes burning with a promise that terrified and thrilled me. The baker was dead. She had died in that overturned car. The woman sitting in the helicopter was something else entirely. She was the partner of a king, and she had just proven she had the teeth to wear the crown. Where are we going? I asked the pilot. The secondary safe house is compromised. Alessandro answered for him, his voice weak but steady. "We are going to the penthouse in the city, the fortress. Back to the lion's den?" I asked. "No," Alessandro said, closing his eyes as the pain meds kicked in. "We are going to the throne room, and then we are going to hunt." I leaned my head back against the vibrating metal wall of the helicopter. I closed my eyes. I could still smell the cordite. I could still feel the recoil of the rifle. I wasn't running anymore. I was hunting. 2 weeks. That was how long it had been since the helicopter lifted us out of the burning woods of the Catskills. 2 weeks of silence, of healing, and of preparing for the final act of a play that had started with a simple, cruel wager. We were staying in the penthouse, Alessandro's fortress in the sky overlooking Manhattan. It was a space of glass and steel, cold and impenetrable, but in the last 14 days, we had made it something else. We had made it a home. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in the master bedroom, smoothing the fabric of my dress. It wasn't silver, the color of the naive girl who walked into the plaza. It wasn't burgundy, the color of the woman trying to prove she could bleed. It was gold, liquid, molten gold silk that poured over my body like a second skin. It was strapless, structured like a corset at the top, flowing into a slit skirt that revealed the faint, healing scratches on my legs from the car wreck. It was the color of victory, the color of the Versiani Empire. "You look dangerous." I turned. Alessandro was leaning against the doorframe. He was using a cane, a sleek black ebony woodstick with a silver handle, favoring his right leg. The doctors had saved the limb, reconstructing the crushed bone with pins and plates, but he still walked with a heavy limp. To anyone else, it might have looked like weakness. To me, it looked like survival. He was wearing a black suit, tailored to perfection, to hide the bulk of the bandages on his leg and the gun holster under his arm. His hair was trimmed, the cuts on his face from the glass faded to thin pink lines. But his eyes were the same, dark, intense, and currently devouring me. "I learned from the best," I said, walking over to him. I stopped inches from his chest, reaching up to adjust his tie, a habit that had become our silent language of affection. "Are you ready for this? The doctor said you shouldn't be standing for too long." "I will stand long enough to see him fall," Alessandro said. His voice was grim, lacking the softness he usually reserved for me in private. Today, he wasn't just my lover. He was the capo dei capi, the head of heads. "He's terrified, you know," I said quietly. "My guard told me Matteo has been weeping in his cell for 3 days. "Good," Alessandro said. "Fear is the only language Matteo understands." He thought he could speak power, but he was illiterate. He reached out, his large hand cupping my neck, his thumb resting against the pulse point. "And you? Are you ready to walk into a room full of wolves and tell them you are the one holding the leash?" I covered his hand with mine. I thought about the rifle in my hands in the snowy woods. I thought about the heat of the fire that took my father's bakery. I thought about the girl I used to be, who apologized for taking up space. She was gone. "I'm not afraid of wolves, Alessandro," I whispered. "I'm the one who shot the hunter." He smiled, a rare, sharp expression of pride. "Then let's go. The council is waiting." The meeting was held in the back room of an exclusive cigar club in Lower Manhattan, neutral ground for the 5 families. The air inside was thick with smoke and tension. Security was tighter than the president's detail. Every man at the door patted us down, though they hesitated when they got to me. Alessandro shot them a look that could have frozen magma. "She carries what she wants. Touch her and you lose the hand." They stepped back, letting me pass with the small pearl-handled pistol in my clutch, a gift from Alessandro for our 2-week anniversary of surviving the crash. We walked into the chamber. It was a cavernous room with dark mahogany walls and a round table in the center. 5 men sat there. The Dons, the architects of organized crime in the city. Don Ricci was there, looking older and wearier than he had at the gala. Don Rinaldi, the heads of the Gambino and Genovese factions. When Alessandro entered, the sound of his cane striking the hardwood floor echoed like a gavel. Click, step, click, step. He didn't bow. He didn't apologize for his lateness. He walked to the empty chair at the head of the table, the seat of the chairman, and pulled it out. But he didn't sit. He turned to me and pulled out the chair next to him. "Sit," he commanded softly. A murmur went through the room. Wives didn't sit at the council table. Mistresses certainly didn't. "Versiani," Don Ricci grumbled, taking the cigar out of his mouth. "This is a meeting for heads of families, not for company." Alessandro looked at Ricci. "Clara Mitchell is not company. She is the reason the Russian expansion into the Catskills failed. She is the reason I am standing here." She sits. Ricci looked at me. I held his gaze. My chin lifted, the gold dress catching the dim light. I didn't fidget. I didn't look down. I looked him dead in the eye, just like I had looked at the men in the woods. Ricci grunted, nodding slowly. "She sits." I sat. Alessandro took his seat beside me, placing his cane on the table like a scepter. "Bring him in," Alessandro ordered. The heavy double doors at the back of the room opened. Two of Alessandro's biggest guards dragged a man in. It took me a moment to recognize him. Matteo Verciani had always been the mirror image of his brother. Handsome, polished, arrogant. The creature kneeling on the floor was none of those things. He was unshaven, his face gaunt and sallow. His arm, the one Alessandro had broken twice, was in a heavy cast strapped to his chest. He smelled of fear and unwashed clothes. He looked up, his eyes darting around the room, landing on the Dons, begging for an ally. He found none. Then he looked at Alessandro, and finally, at me. "Clara," he rasped. His voice cracked. "Clara, please, tell him." I looked down at him. I expected to feel anger. I expected to feel the heat of the fire he had set. But all I felt was a cold, distant pity. He was so small. "Tell him what, Matteo?" I asked, my voice steady. "It was just a game," he cried, looking around the table, trying to appeal to the other men. "You understand, don't you? It was a bet, a stupid bet. I didn't mean for it to go this far. She was just a baker. I was trying to have some fun." Alessandro went still. The air in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Just a baker," Alessandro repeated, his voice low and deadly quiet. Matteo flinched. "I didn't mean it like that. I meant, she wasn't part of this. She wasn't supposed to matter. It was $50,000, Alessandro. I did it to get a rise out of you. That's all. You burned her legacy," Alessandro said. "You sold family secrets to the Bratva. You tried to slit her throat in my home. I was drunk. I was scared." Matteo sobbed, crawling forward a few inches. "I'm your brother. We shared a womb. You can't kill me. The law says no fratricide." He was right. The old laws of the Mafia forbade a man from killing his own blood. It was considered a curse. Alessandro stood up. He picked up his cane and limped around the table until he was standing over Matteo. He looked like a god of vengeance, towering over a mortal sinner. "You are right, Matteo," Alessandro said. "I cannot kill you. My blood forbids it. And frankly, death is too easy for you. You want to die. You want to be a tragedy. You want people to say, 'Poor Matteo, cut down by his tyrant brother.'" Alessandro leaned down, gripping Matteo's chin in his hand, forcing him to look up. "But you don't get to be a tragedy. You don't get to be a memory." Alessandro let go and straightened up, turning to the council. "I propose a sentence of damnatio memoriae," Alessandro announced. "Erasure." Ricci nodded solemnly. "The Siberian route." Matteo's eyes widened in true, primal horror. "No," he whispered. "No, Alessandro, please. Kill me. Just shoot me. Don't send me there. The Russians you sold us to?" Alessandro said smoothly. "They are very angry that their investment failed. But I have negotiated a peace treaty with them. The price of peace is you." "No!" Matteo screamed, trying to scramble backward. The guard seized him. "You will be shipped to a labor camp in Oymyakon," Alessandro pronounced, his voice ringing like a funeral bell. "You will have no name. You will have no tongue, for you talk too much. You will dig coal in the frozen earth until your body gives out, and when you die, you will be buried in an unmarked grave in the snow. Clara! Matteo shrieked, looking at me with wild eyes. Help me! I made you famous! I made you who you are! I stood up. The gold silk rustled in the silence. I walked over to where he was kneeling. I looked down at the man who had tried to destroy me for a laugh. You didn't make me, I said, my voice cutting through his hysteria. You just lit the fire that forged me. I turned to Alessandro. He said I was a bet. Alessandro looked at me, his eyes softening just for a fraction of a second. He was wrong. No, I corrected. He was right. I was a bet. I looked back at Matteo, who was trembling in the guard's grip. But you forgot the most important rule of gambling, Matteo, I said coldly. Never bet against the house. I turned my back on him. Take him away. Matteo screamed as they dragged him out. He begged. He cursed. He cried. But as the heavy doors slammed shut, cutting off his voice, the room settled into silence. Alessandro looked at the council. It is done. The Verciani family is secure. The Bratva is pacified. Does anyone have an objection? Don Ricci stood up. He looked at Alessandro, then he looked at me. He bowed his head, a deep, respectful bow. No objection. Don Verciani. Donna Verciani. The title hung in the air. Donna, wife, queen. Alessandro smiled. He held out his hand to me. I took it. Let's go home, Clara, he said. We have a bakery to open. 6 months later, the smell was the first thing that hit you. A heavenly combination of vanilla bean, roasted espresso, and warm yeast. It drifted out of the open doors of Mitchell and Verciani Patisserie and curled around the block, where a line of people had been waiting since 6 a.m. This wasn't my father's bakery. That bakery was a memory, preserved in photographs on the wall. This was something new. The floors were black and white marble, imported from Italy. The counters were gleaming brass and glass. The chandeliers were crystal. It was opulent, ridiculous, and absolutely perfect. I stood behind the counter, piping cannoli, filling with a speed that came from muscle memory. I was wearing a chef's coat, but it was tailored silk, embroidered with gold thread. Table 4 needs 2 cappuccinos and a lobster tail, a waitress called out. Coming up, I replied, wiping my hands on a towel. I looked over at the espresso machine. Alessandro Verciani, the most feared man in New York, the king of the 5 families, was struggling with the milk steamer. He was wearing a casual white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing the faint scars on his arms. He looked focused, intense, treating the coffee machine with the same seriousness he treated a hostile takeover. "You're scorching the milk," I called out, teasing him. He scowled, tapping the thermometer. "The pressure is inconsistent. I need to have a word with the manufacturer." "It's not the machine, it's the operator," I laughed, walking over to him. I slid my arms around his waist from behind, resting my cheek against his back. He immediately relaxed, leaning into my touch. "You don't have to work the shift, you know. We have staff. I like the smell," he murmured, turning around in my arms to face me. "And I like watching you boss people around. It's exciting." I rolled my eyes, swatting his chest. "You're impossible." He caught my hand and kissed the flour smudge on my wrist. "I am devoted." The bell above the door jingled. I looked up to see a group of tourists walking in, eyes wide as they took in the luxury of the shop. They didn't know that the man making coffee was a mafia don. They didn't know that the woman frosting the cake had killed 3 men in a forest. They just saw a couple in love, running a business. "It's perfect," I whispered, looking around at the bustling shop. My dad, he would have freaked out about the prices, but he would have loved the crowd. He would have been proud, Alessandro said firmly. "You saved his name." "We saved it," I corrected. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He placed it on the counter next to the espresso grinder. "Alessandro," I warned, "we are working." "I have a debt to settle," he said, ignoring me. He opened the box. Inside sat a ring, but not just any ring. It was a massive, emerald-cut diamond, flanked by 2 rubies. It was aggressive. It was beautiful. It was him. "You said once that you owed me $50,000 for the bet," Alessandro said, his voice dropping low enough that only I could hear him over the noise of the cafe. "The bet my brother made." I remember, I said, my heart starting to race. I don't want the money, he said. I want to renegotiate the terms of the loan. He picked up the ring. I want a lifetime contract, he said. Exclusive rights, no exit clause. You cook the eggplant. I handle the enemies. And we build an empire on sugar and bullets. I looked at him. I saw the scars on his face, the gray hairs starting to show at his temples from the stress of the last 6 months. I saw the man who had pulled me from a burning building, who had stood in the rain to protect me, who had learned to froth milk because I needed help on a Tuesday. I took the ring from his hand. I slid it onto my finger. It fit perfectly. You drive a hard bargain, Mr. Verziani, I whispered. I always win. He smirked. No, I said, grabbing him by the collar and pulling him down for a kiss that stopped the entire bakery in its tracks. We won. When we broke apart, breathless and smiling, the customers were clapping. Alessandro glared at them, and they immediately went back to their pastries, terrified and charmed all at once. He turned back to me, his eyes shining with a light that banished all the shadows of his world. Back to work, Donna Verziani, he ordered playfully. Those cannolis won't fill themselves. Yes, boss, I said. I went back to the counter, the diamond heavy on my hand, the smell of yeast and coffee in the air. The wrong brother had bet against me and lost everything. The right brother had bet on me and won the world. And as I watched Alessandro frown at the espresso machine again, muttering threats in Italian to the steam wand, I knew that this chaotic, dangerous, beautiful life was exactly where I was meant to be. The bet was paid in full, and the payout was forever.